Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
I've been married to Kathy for 15 years. We have 3 kids, Evan, Derek, and Lila, and a nice house in a good school district. Our lives are comfortable, 2 newer cars, and my wife has the luxury of working for a nonprofit because we don't really need the extra income. I have a job that interests me. The workload's eased up in the last few years, and my hours are reasonable. I travel occasionally, both for work and pleasure. On the surface, everything's great. Good family, a stable home, the 2-car garage. What else could I possibly want? But then, one evening after work, I came home to find Kathy sitting at the kitchen table looking nervous. "Hey, what's going on? Is everything okay with the kids?" I asked, immediately worried. She looked at me, her face tight with tension. "They're fine, Ryan," she said, her voice soft but steady. "But I have some really bad news. I'm leaving you. I'm going to marry Henry Caldwell." I froze. "What? Who's Henry Caldwell? What does he have that I don't? Do you love him?" She nodded, her eyes sad. "I do love him. We've been seeing each other for about a year now. He's the governor's cousin, on the side of the family that inherited most of the fortune. The kids and I are going to move in with him." That name hit me like a ton of bricks. Henry Caldwell? That Caldwell? Are you serious? You've been seeing him for a year and I never knew? What the hell is going on? I was stunned. My whole world had just crumbled. It's true then. The husband is the last to know. Well, I guess I made it easy for you. Me trusting you implicitly. Are the children mine? Of course they are. How could you think that of me? Oh, yes, they are yours. She was nice looking, but not a stunner. And nothing out of the ordinary in bed. Unless she must have worked a lot harder to please him than she ever did with me. But what's the point? The pain was turning to a bitter anger, but I was able to keep control of myself. I guess I've been screwing a $1 million hooker. I glared at her, jumped to my feet, and gestured towards the door. "Well, get the hell out of my house, and don't let the door hit your butt on the way out. You goddamn cheating woman. Enjoy the good life, until he dumps you for someone younger. I have nothing more to say to you." She tossed an envelope on the table and moved quickly out the door, and I sat and cried. I went upstairs to lie down, and saw that the children's rooms had been emptied out, including the pictures they had hung on the walls. It felt like I was living in a tomb. In the weeks to follow, she and Henry Caldwell refused to let me talk with my kids. It was Lila who snuck out and knocked on my door. We worked out a clandestine meeting arrangement. I got 6 burner phones and gave the kids one of the numbers. Every couple of weeks I gave them a new number, so if anyone checked their phones, my numbers were only called occasionally. We were careful about emails which could only be sent from the library computers or a friend's computer, making sure that I use a fake name to hide from my ex. So, I kept up with their lives, not as often as I would like, while Lila called every other day, and the boys about once or twice a week. In the months that followed, it didn't get better. Words cannot describe the fury, hurt, depression that washed over me, that was drowning me. Kathy had traded up in marriage, so far up that she didn't bother to ask for any of our assets, alimony, or child support. There was no point. I guess, to her credit, she asked for nothing of any commercial value. But what she did take was priceless, my 3 children. We sometimes read stories where a woman is offered $1 million to have sex with some guy. Usually it's women we wonder about, the assumption being that most guys would do it for free. The goofy part of that question is, who would pay $1 million for sex, especially for sex with an average person? I guess that Caldwell has tens of millions of dollars, so I can see her bailing for that. Who knows, maybe it was love. I can say for sure I wouldn't have run off with a Mrs. Caldwell, but I suppose you don't know until someone offers. And the kids too, hiding contact with me. I guess it's the money too, the promise of a free Ivy League educations, along with the more immediate pleasures of the lifestyle big money can bring. Cars, clothes, skiing in Aspen, summer in France, doesn't compare with surf fishing at the Jersey Shore with Pop, but neither does it excuse my children for not insisting on having a foot in each camp. I thought I brought them up better than that, but then they are kids. The biggest thing was still, what the hell did Caldwell see in her? She really didn't stand out in any crowd I could imagine. She was middling in about everything. She was really good with people, but so are a lot of people. As to our friends, most stayed cordial, but now being single, occasionally I was asked to a party, and I did have a couple of buddies to fish with, but I was really lonely without my best friend, and I felt like damaged goods, which I was. I thought of suing them, but my lawyer told me to forget it, that I really didn't have a chance. And for what? I make good money, $130,000 a year, which is a nice living, but against Caldwell? So, I caved and tried to get on with my life. Like I said, in that wrenched first year I really had a hard time. My home was now just a house. Functionally, I was on the very edge of my children's lives. I wasn't fit to date women either. Really, it was my daughter that got me through that horrible year. I kept it together by immersing myself in work. I mean, what else could I do? I felt sorry for myself, buried in self-pity, rolled in misery like a dog in shit for almost a year. After 6 months of that, I sold the damn house and got an apartment in town, cut way back on overtime, and began to flesh out ideas I had come up with over the years, but were ignored by the elderly guys in management. I realized I was a better businessman than the fools running the company. Ever see clearly the way for the business to grow and prosper, but the management couldn't let go of the old business model they developed years ago, which successfully built the business, but was wrong for today's world and was taking it down? It was like I was sailing on the Titanic with me, the only one who could see the iceberg. What could you do besides dress warmly and stand near the lifeboats, reading the launch instructions? My job search was producing nothing, until out of the blue, I got a job interview from a company that bought one of our smaller competitors. They wanted me to implement my employer's old business model so they could grow their company. In a series of interviews, I pointed out the problems with that and outlined my own ideas. They were actually willing to pay a premium to lure me away from Titanic Incorporated and more besides because their business was in Chestertown, Maryland. I was able to negotiate a big vacation package by agreeing to take most of it 1 day a week and a contract tied to business growth and profits. Apparently, they had had trouble getting people to relocate to a backwater. Charming or not, Chestertown is as chaotic in the summer as it is dead in the winter. I jumped at the chance to make a clean break of it, changed my email address, got a new phone number. Of course my children knew, but not their mother. Of course, in this age of the internet, if you live your life, you cannot really disappear, but I thought of it as a way to reinvent myself, as neither my former employer nor my former wife valued me, and it helped to put them in the fuzzy light of the past. Now, I didn't get big-time rich like Caldwell, but I did real well by my standards, and as the business took off, I was able to hire talented young people to implement the business plan. After a few years, I found myself with a nice equity position and began working from home a lot and let others do the day-to-day stuff. I rented a place for a while until I found a big 3-bedroom craftsman-style bungalow on a lot with a view, but within walking distance of Chesterton. The big demand here is for old historic homes, but houses from the 1920, 1930 are modern houses and pretty reasonably priced. As a bonus, it had $20,000 of woodworking tools and a heated garage that the old guy bought new when he retired, but never got around to learning how to use. I joined the local historical society, volunteered for this and that, put myself out there, as they say, but unfortunately, the selection of suitable mates was thin. I was 45 years old, relatively few single women in the 35 to 40 age group, and of the few of a suitable age. Well, I'll get shot for saying this, but the education level of the year-round residents was mixed, and the summer people were generally too high-end for my taste. One of the members of the Historical Society asked me if I could fix an electrical problem on his boat. I liked the old guy, so he and I spent Saturday on the boat, and I fixed a plethora of assorted problems. We took it out for a short cruise, and I found I liked sailing, and he liked company, so he taught me sailing. We worked out a trade. I'd keep all the mechanical/electrical stuff running. He's pay someone to the endless cosmetic restoration and cleaning, and I could take it out more or less at will. I just had to call in advance. If it was a day's sail, often as not we would go out together. I should tell you that I could have bought the damn boat, but I'm cheap, and who wants the expense of owning and maintaining a boat? I was at the marina changing the oil in the auxiliary engine, and heard hoots and shrieks as a boat was ineptly wallowing up to the dock. I grabbed a boat hook and trotted over. Seeing the run of the tide, I called for the stern rope. They threw it short, but I could just hook it and pulled the stern to the dock, whereupon in the tide pushed the bow in so I could catch that rope which was dragging in the water and tie them fast. The idiot at the wheel was drunkenly insisting I join their party for dinner at one of the expense account restaurants nearby. I had no interest in spending the evening with a bunch of honking drunks and politely demurred when a really good-looking woman came up beside Captain Rum. "Don't be put off by Wallace. I would like you to come to dinner with us. After all, you rescued us. So much you can infer from a sentience." She was sober, no rings on her left hand, nice-looking, educated, faint British accent, with a body built for comfort. "Now would you be sitting alongside me at dinner?" Hoots of teasing laughter from the boat. "He hooked the boat, and you hooked him. Way to go, Heather." We were smitten with each other. Heather was 7 years younger than me, worked in a law office in Washington, D.C., writing laws and regulations for lobbyists. She was a gorgeous thing, not Hollywood gorgeous, but somebody I certainly would pick out of a crowd. As we talked, I found she shared my politics, love of old things, the water, and reading. She couldn't have children, which bothered her years ago when she got the news, but over the years became reconciled with it. Me, after the experience I had with mine, that didn't bother me at all. Heather, I don't want this night to end. No strings here. Would you stay at my house? I've a guest bedroom with a locking door. Not that you need to. Got your driver's license with you? Give it to me? I handed it over. She took a picture of it with her phone, emailed it. There, if I don't come back in one piece, my mother will come after you. Can you drive me to Waldorf Sunday night? Sure. Where's Waldorf? No cabs around the restaurant, but I waved to a couple of older women I knew fairly well who were just leaving, and I asked them if they could drop us off at the marina where my car was. One of them had set me up with 2 blind dates and was delighted to see I was sweet on Heather. After the introductions to Grace and Eulalia, who prefers to be called Lily, they teased Heather. Lily started in. Ryan is a real asset to the town. I try to fix him up with a local girl or two, but my mistake was not being able to find anybody who looks as lovely as you. We want to keep him here, so when you marry him, you have to agree to live here. Grace chimed in. He can cook, fix anything, and has a good income. Plus, he's nice to sweet old ladies. Heather gave it right back. Well, if he's been rejected by all of the young women around here, maybe I should be careful. They must know something I don't. Lily. Or more likely you recognize what you've got there. Bathes regularly, but a very disheveled dresser. He does need taking care of. Ladies, please, I just met Heather this afternoon. You'll scare her away. We didn't have sex that weekend, but the next weekend, we took the boat out, and we drilled like rabbits as both of us were ending a long dry spell. Physically, she was the opposite of my ex-wife. The ex was short, skinny, and blonde. Heather was almost as tall as me, nicely rounded body and jet black-haired. She was English, her father from Avery, England, and her mother from Madras, India. Best of all, we laughed at each other's jokes. Unfortunately, she was also the polar opposite of my ex-wife in not so good ways. Kathy was willing to try anything you ever read about or saw in a corn film, and willing to do it a lot. Heather liked sex, but she was pretty uptight. I was puzzled because she talked a good game, but was really limited in bed, and it wasn't getting any better. I had no trouble getting her to pleasure, but she thought BJ dirty talk, outdoor sex, and just about everything else was perverted or disrespectful to her personally. I was about to reluctantly toss her back into the dating pool when I got an inspiration one cold, wet day in the fall. We walking into Chesterton one Saturday, and I realized that she was the only woman in the town still wearing sandals. I wondered if she had a foot fetish. I got 2 drinks in her that evening at the restaurant and a glass of wine at the house, so she was pretty laid back. Heather, some people feel that sex can be gross or humiliating, and that loving people should be dignified when in bed together. I think my job is to do for you whatever you enjoy, and that your job is to do for me whatever I enjoy. Ryan, don't you like making love with me? What are you talking about? What we do, you and I, is love-making. You're good at that. But there's also lusty drilling and sex play, and we haven't done anything like that. Tonight, I'd like to do that. Well, we did just that. This year the weather was remarkable mild. Well into October, and our romance was perhaps the happiest time for me in decades. Once a week, weather permitting, we'd sail on Chesapeake Bay. Often it was warm enough to shed our clothes for a while, with nary another boat in sight, and have a beer, swim, and generally screw hard once or twice, and snuggling under a blanket as the boat rocked us to sleep, and then to make love in the cool dawn. That fall we fell in love. Our town is 150 years away from D.C. in lifestyle, but only an hour and a half by car. That winter, she sold her Waldorf condo and rented a pied-a-terre in D.C., moving in with me in Chesterton. She has a somewhat flexible schedule, and most weeks spent a couple of nights in D.C. and the rest with me. I proofread her stuff not so much for spelling and grammar, but for clarity and completeness. I would be bullshitting to say that I truly understood everything she wrote, but in the moment I could follow it, and if I couldn't, there was a problem with it. She was a bit more social than me, but I like people too, and we both enjoyed going out with her friends in town. Mine near home, and life was good. She had to head into D.C. one Sunday morning to prep for a case, and as luck would have it, the town council meeting I was attending wrapped up earlier than expected on Monday. So, I decided to surprise her by driving to her apartment. I got there around 9:30, but there was no sign of her. I called, but it went straight to voicemail. Given the mess I'd just come out of with Andrea, my ex, I'll admit it made me uneasy. She called back about an hour later. Sorry, just taking a quick break, she said. I'll be working half the night. What's up? We chatted for a bit, and I was trying to figure out how to ask her where she was. Before I could, she volunteered the info. Well, it's turning into a hell of a week, she said with a sigh. We found out Sunday that our Chicago office didn't do a damn thing on the federal truck standards. So this morning, The whole team packed up and came to the Westin in Fairfax to get it all wrapped up by 2 p.m. tomorrow. I'll be lucky if I sleep at all tonight. The only good news is I'll be back in Chesterton a day earlier than planned. Her voice had that familiar mix of exhaustion and determination, and for a moment, I forgot about everything else. She was so damn driven, always on the move. Oh good. Actually, the council meeting ended early, so I thought I'd surprise you. I'm at the apartment. Oh, you poor thing. Spend the night. I should be back about noon or 1. We can have lunch. I'd normally take you up on that, but I need to get back in the morning, and you'll be exhausted. Honey, I'm so sorry I missed you. At least I'll catch your scent when I slide between the sheets. I'll be missing you. I'll take a long nap at the apartment tomorrow and be home in time for a late supper. I love you. A week later, she said. I realized I have to shut my phone off a lot when I'm in meetings, or just so I can concentrate, but then I don't know who is calling, so I got a smartphone for just you and me. We can set it up so you can track me, that way you'll know where I am. I don't need to know that. I trust you. She laughed, and I trust you as well, but I have no secrets from you, and you never know. That phone feature may come in handy sometime for some other reason. So she gave me the gift of knowledge, which wasn't so good for Adam and Eve, but for me, I checked where she was a few times and never bothered again. We had had the biblical 7 years of good luck, and I wondered if it was coming to an end when I opened my door one Saturday morning to be greeted by my ex-wife. I wrinkled my nose and said, "You're dead to me," as I shut the door. Of course Heather heard what happened. Who was that? My ex-wife. I told her to F off, but now she's was knocking again. On how nice, invite her in. I told her she was dead and shut the door on her. Heather glared at me. It's my house too, and you'll be nice to her if only because she's a guest in our house. Things are obviously going very poorly for her, or she wouldn't be here. Heather smiled as she opened the door. My husband tells me you're Kathy. How nice to finally meet you. I'm Heather, by the way. I looked at her more carefully and shivered a little. Kathy was always thin, but now she looked gaunt with sunken eyes and cheeks. My first thought was, what the hell did I ever see in her? And the second had me wondering if she was seriously ill. Kathy looked at me warily and said, I'm sorry to intrude. I won't be long. Heather slid right in with, don't worry about that. We're staying at home this afternoon. We were thinking of going out, but Ryan has some yard work to get done. I'm putting water on. I do so want to talk with you. Did you have a pleasant drive down? I took the hint and went outside. Call me when the coffees dripped and left them to themselves. It must have been 20 minutes later Heather called. Coffee's ready. I had put the last quart of oil in the mower and went in the house to clean my hands and pour a coffee. I sat with them as they finished their chatter. Peace came over me. I realized thankfully that I had no feelings for Kathy at all. No love, no hate, zero emotions of any consequence, and looking at the two of them, I could honestly say I was well rid of her. The coffee mugs were finally empty. So after all these years, Kathy, I don't suppose this is a social call. No, it isn't. You have 2 daughters. The youngest is 7 years old and needs a kidney transplant. Jesus, what a bombshell. No. Of course I knew she and Caldwell had daughter, but mine? Can't be. You don't say. That's too bad, but as you know I've never met this child. So why don't you go to Switzerland or wherever money can buy everything and fix her? That's got nothing to do with me. So for the second time, why are you here? My husband's shooting blanks and, handing me an envelope, I knew you would be doubtful. So I got the DNA reports. I didn't have a sample of your DNA, but all of your children have the same father. She's your flesh and blood. We're having trouble finding a kidney match, and she in total kidney failure. Ryan, she won't live all that long, and the doctors think you're likely a match. I'm not, or I wouldn't be here. I'm here to ask you to be checked for a match, and if so to save her life by donating a kidney. I'll pay you anything you ask. Heather saw me starting to go orbital and put her hand on my arm, squeezed hard, and jumped in. We need to discuss this. Why don't you email us the detailed information and we'll discuss it and get back to you. Every day she's suffering. Kathy, let me talk to Ryan. I'll call you the day after tomorrow. I promise. Heather stood up and rummaged in the desk for one of my business cards. As Kathy was leaving, I couldn't help saying sarcastically, it was nice to hear how the number of my ex-children is multiplying. Do let me know if any more pop out. Drive carefully on your way back to where you came from. I shut the door while Heather walked Kathy to the car talking earnestly. I reheated a cup of coffee thinking the nerve of the witch to rub her money in my face and went out to my shop. Heather called me couple hours later for supper. Well, there's what I'd call a troubled woman. Her child is dying, facing a slow death, and the only best hope is a big-time favor from a guy who hates her. And that weren't enough. Her marriage is shaky. That about sum it up? I don't hate her, I just despise her, and I don't despise her for dumping me, but rather for depriving me of my children, and depriving my children of me. She thinks she has it rough facing the loss of a kid. Okay, my kids aren't dead, but they might as well be because they aren't really a part of my life. You think the kid's really mine? I doubt she'd lie about that. I imagine you'll find out pretty quickly if they check you for a kidney match. Shit, I gotta read up on that. I really don't know nothing about kidney disease, transplants, or anything like that. You make her any promises? Just what you heard me say about calling her Tuesday. The child is stable, but not good. And Ryan, I'll support you, whatever comes. I got looking up on Wikipedia, the National Kidney Foundation website, and found that the kid eventually dies without a new kidney. There is a huge shortage of kidneys. The best outcome is if the donor is a close match to the recipient. The kid would probably get a transplant at some point, but it would be a miserable time for her until she got one, and she might still die of kidney failure. Sunday night, I poured Heather a glass of the good wine we save for company, not the usual plunk we have on the table. You realize I would love to kick that woman to the curb and throw her under a bus. She hasn't changed a bit. Had she not absolutely needed me, she never would have told me about my daughter. But I have to do this. You know that, don't you? This what? Throw her under the bus or donate a kidney. We both laughed. It broke the tension. Love, I wish the kid was okay. I wish your children were part of our lives, and I wish you got to keep both kidneys. But if I had a child, I know I'd do anything I needed to do to save her, and I know you feel the same way. So I understand why you need to give her your kidney. I saw that strength, that courage, and loyalty in you before I married you. I was thinking, so, she handed us a way out, didn't she? A free pass, I said, my voice low with frustration. But what do I want out of all this? Right now, it feels like all the pain and fallout is landing on me, and my daughter too. How do I get the ex and her husband to take some of the heat, to put something into this mess? I don't know why you'd care about that, she replied, shaking her head. Forget about them for now. Focus on what you want. Do you even know what that is? I paused, thinking about it for a moment. No, I guess I never really thought about it. Do you know what you want? She gave a soft chuckle, patted my arm, and smiled. That's a question only you can answer. I leaned back, looking out the window, lost in thought. I was thinking, when the boys were growing up, I was so caught up in working, bringing home the money, fixing up the house, the cars, that I never really got to enjoy them. And then they were gone. So now, I've got this daughter I don't even know. I want to be a part of her life. I want to be there for her, to have my picture taken with her on prom night. They still do proms, right? Heather nodded in agreement, though she seemed unsure where I was going with it. I want to raise her like I should have raised my older kids. That's what I want. There was a long silence before she spoke again, her tone serious. Jesus, Ryan, you're thinking about custody, aren't you? She'll never give you that. And honestly, it'd be traumatic for Maria too. I mean, I'd love to have my own daughter on weekends, but it's a lot to ask of anyone. I sighed deeply, knowing the road ahead would be far from easy. But for the first time in a while, I felt clear about what I wanted. I think she might give us custody. Remember the judgment of Solomon? 2 women claim a child. Solomon decided to cut the kid in half, one half for each claimant. One woman agreed, the other renounced her claim, rather than the child die. Solomon declared her the mother. Kathy will do the same, but I want her to have to work for it. Ryan, you don't believe that. You can't make custody a condition of donating a kidney. A kidney for the kid for a kidney. What are you thinking? Lot of thoughts running around in my mind right now. You're right, I can't require custody as a quid pro quo. The kid gets my kidney, but I was thinking Kathy doesn't have to know that. I had worked hard to push the rage out of my heart years ago, and did a good job of it too, but seeing Kathy and the secret child, it came flooding back. I wanted revenge on Kathy too, but I didn't tell Heather that. That night we worked out the framework of a deal, and one of the lawyers Heather worked with offered to work it up into something nice, legal, and enforceable. Just before we went up to Greenville, I added a page at the end. Took me almost 20 minutes to find the same font the goddamn lawyers used. I wanted everything to match. Monday, she called Miriam and set up a family meeting between us, Miriam, her husband Henry, and my 3 older children. We stipulated that Maria not be present, which was only common sense. I went up the day before for a tissue match, which proved she was my daughter, and that I was an excellent match for a kidney donation. While I was doing all that, Heather spent the better part of the day visiting with Kathy and the children, and they got along quite well. The next day, Heather and I sat down with the Caldwells. Henry was clearly annoyed at the whole thing. Kathy was sick with worry, and my other kids weren't much better. They did look good, wearing quality clothing, expensive haircuts, perfect teeth. Well, I read up on all this, and the Kidney Foundation is a really good charity. I'd like to see them come out ahead on this. So it turns out that you were correct, Kathy. Maria is my daughter, and the good news is that I'm a good match to donate a kidney for her. But what you are asking me to do is to undergo major surgery, pop out one of my kidneys, and give it to a stranger. But she's your child, said my ex-wife. No, she's the child of Henry and Kathy Caldwell. I waved towards them. You all left my life abruptly and for good. And none of you ever told me about Maria until you absolutely had to. I have every reason to expect you'll cloister Maria away from me as well, just as soon as you get your pound of flesh out of me. Plus, this is all on me. Not one of you will have shed a drop of blood, not a minute of pain. I mean, you folks don't have any skin in the game, do you? Sorry, but the continuation of my genes isn't that big a deal in my life. Kathy's face was contorted in anguish. There has to be a way. We'll do anything to save her. Anything you want. I paused a bit for dramatic effect. What will it take, you ask? Well, two things. For one, I want some time with my daughter. 72 days a year. 20% her time she'll live with Heather and I. Kathy, would you think that's fair? What's that? 2 weekends a month? Well, that'd be 48 days, so add a week or two in the summer, that's about 15% of the time. So, okay, I would get her 15% of the time and you 85% of the time. Okay, so you agree that would be fair. She looked at her husband, who shrugged and said, more than fair. I think so too. We agree on that. Now consider what I will be going through. Perfectly healthy, getting cut open and an organ removed to help someone else live. How many of you, in my place, would be willing to do what you are asking me to do? Raise your hand. The three women's hands shot up, my two sons a few seconds later, and hesitantly Henry's hand. So you'd all be willing to do what you want me to do? They looked at each other, nodding. Then we have the makings of a deal that will help the Kidney Foundation too. On one day, Kathy and I will donate kidneys, one to Maria and one to the transplant program. And when I come out of surgery, Henry goes in to donate a kidney to the foundation as well. When that happens, Maria gets my kidney. I get custody of Maria. What do we say? 15% of the time. That seems fair to us all. How's that sound? You two will be written up in the paper as heroes. Henry saw a distinction. You'll take credit for it all. What's credit to me? You can say it was your idea. You're all the more noble because your donation is going to strangers, not to kin. Everybody nodded. They were good with it, but Henry didn't look all that happy. I gave him a verbal poke. You okay with this, Jim? He quickly put on his public happy face mask. Sure, it's a good thing to do, and it helps lots of people. So why not? Kathy? They all smiled and nodded. Kathy gushed. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Ryan. You don't know what this means to me. You're wrong about that, Kathy. I do know what this means to you. In fact, more than you realize. But we all agree that Kathy, Henry, and I will donate a kidney. Nodding all around. Okay, so here's the contract for you all to sign. There is a penalty clause on the next to last page, which is my second condition, and Kathy and Henry have to initial it and date it. Henry got serious in a hurry. What the hell's this about a contract? We're all family here, that's not called for, and I for one won't sign. My replacement was grating on my nerves, the pompous prick. We're all a family here, Jimmy, only like the interlocking Olympic rings. Different families, my wife and are a family, and you, Kathy, and the children are a family, and the children, Kathy and myself, are a biological family. So the family bit is sort of muddled. The nice thing about contracts is everybody knows what they are agreeing to in advance. And the penalty clause. If for any reason either of you cannot or will not donate a kidney, Heather and I get custody of Maria. She takes my last name. And the custody figures, which we all agreed were fair, are reversed. We get her 85% of the time. You get her 15% of the time. Of course, we'll ease into this. But if one of your reneges, she'll be registered in the spring for school in Chestertown. Pandemonium. I had to raise my voice. People. If you all go through with the deal, you get what you all agreed was exactly what you all felt was fair. Only if one of you Welches, do I get custody of just one. Just one, mind you. Just one of my 4 children. Let's not be greedy here. Kathy spoke up. We'll take it. Maria lives. That is the big thing here. It's what we all want. It's win-win. She grabbed a pen and signed. Henry balked. So, Jeff, what happens if you don't go through with it? Kathy and I donate kidneys. You do nothing and Maria dies. I smiled. Good thinking, Jimmy. Of course, I come out of surgery before you go in, but there might be a problem of some sort. Here's a letter from the Kidney Foundation that in return for 2 kidneys donated to the foundation, They will put Maria at the head of the list. But you have my word I will go through with it. What more assurance can I give but my word? Kathy was melting down. Sign it, Henry. For our daughter's sake. Henry was hesitant. I'm not sure she's... Kathy jumped on him. Shut up. There's no good way to finish that thought. Sign the goddamn thing. A week later, Kathy went under the knife. And as soon as the surgeon took a piss and changed his scrubs, they cut into me. After I came out of the anesthetic in the ICU, they moved me to a private hospital room. Heather had been with me in the ICU, but as soon as I was settled in the private room, she and Lila came in talking with each other. I got an update on Kathy, and Heather telling me the doctor said I was fine. Lila looked me in the eye and told me she regretted how Henry and Kathy had tried to demonize me. Dad. It was like some kind of almost cult thinking. Like a sacrifice we needed to make for the future. I mean, it's stupid on the face of it now, but we were kids and Henry and Mom, they were all on a different planet. She started crying. I'd hold you in my arms and hug you, but I'm not up to it at the moment. Heather was right there. I can hug you, Lila. I forgive you and your dad as well. Come on. You were a kid then, and you did what you could. But in the future, Ryan and I want you to be an integral part of our life. My son Evan came in the door at that point. Good, you're awake. I'm going to donate a kidney too. I signed up for it while you were under. Henry bailed. By the way, he's postponed it into the indefinite future, but it'll never happen. Gee, Evan, I don't know, is that such a good idea? You've got your whole life ahead of you. I don't know. You don't have to, you know. The deal is done. Your kidney doesn't let him off of the hook. That had nothing to do with it. Maria gets to live with you guys. That's all to the good. I think Maria will be better off. I just gave my word. I said I'd do it. I mean, if my mother and my father could do it, and it is a good thing to do, you know? I've been watching Maria suffer, and as I understand it, they may be able to split my kidney and help 2 people. You had Jimmy figured out, didn't you, Dad? You knew he wouldn't go through with it, and he absolutely hates to be called Jimmy. We'd get grounded for 2 weeks calling him that. Heather was looking at me as it dawned on her how I engineered this thing. I figured he wouldn't give anybody a pound of flesh, but I didn't want to admit it. But better yet, he would be the goat for Kathy losing her daughter. I really don't know Jimbo at all, never laid eyes on him until a week ago. He does seem like a bit of a stuffed shirt. He's not one of us, is he, Dad? You tell me. He may be nothing to me, but I rather think he loves you too. That week began the rest of my life. At first, when we had Maria for the weekends, one of her brothers or her sister would bring her down, and often enough the 2 of them would stay the day, returning in late evening, and the wife or I would take her home Sunday. Pretty soon we had them, Maria and whoever drove her down for the whole weekend. When that all went well, we went a Thursday night to Sunday night. Often enough I had my friend's boat, so we sailed and fished and swam all summer. We took Maria and her sister on vacation seeing the sights of Washington, D.C., and then took the boys on the same tour. We extended the trips an extra day because we couldn't get the kids out of the Smithsonian. At the end of summer, Kathy came down with Maria. The 2 of us chatted. She was more relaxed and happier than I could ever remember. Heather gave us some time together. Ryan, you know Henry and I aren't getting along well, don't you? No, actually I didn't. Heather and I are going great though. Maybe you ought to chat with her. You guys must have done something right in years past. The kids turned out well. Henry hasn't really done much in the parenting department, you know? He was more of an older playmate than a father. Yeah, well, I guess it put a lot on you and the help. From the little I've seen of him, he's not one for sacrifice and hard work. Well, with enough money, you can sit around and fritter your time away, I guess. Did you intend to drive a wedge between us? Kathy, when you bailed on me, you didn't give 2 shits about me. And now I really didn't give a thought to you. First of all, like you, I wanted Maria to live a normal life, and secondly, I wanted my children back in my life. I am willing to share, but I resented greatly that you yourself would not. More than the divorce, I resented that. Well, that's all water under the bridge. I'm good with it now. So, what's your problem with him? By him reneging, I lost Maria, my baby, and now he's cheating on me too. I damn near choked, which morphed into a chuckle and the look on her face. I started hearty laughter. You worthless woman. You were happy enough when you were cheating on your husband and denying him his children, weren't you? You really expect sympathy from me? Turnabout is fair play. Well, believe me, I really do know how you feel, and agree no one should have to give up a child. Better line up a good divorce lawyer. You'll still be rich, or is there a prenup? She started to laugh too. Ryan, you can get me laughing. Yes, turnabout is justice, but justice doesn't feel good for my end. There is a prenup, but yes, I'll be rich. But not happy. That last bit is on you. Somewhere along the line, you missed an essential fact of life. You have to find out what makes you happy, and then find someone who will enable you to do whatever it is that makes you happy. Only you can figure it out and make it happen. So what if Henry is not the man? Cut your losses and develop an exit strategy. Do what you did last time. Start looking, and when you find someone to be with you, someone to help you through the divorce, at least, dump your second husband and marry your third. You're well preserved. Skinny is still in fashion. You've got money. You play golf, tennis, and probably still great in bed. What are you lacking? Seriously, give Heather a call. Whatever she did when her husband left her worked for her. She can at least commensurate with you more than I can. I started laughing again. I couldn't help myself. Kathy left in late afternoon. Later, Heather, Maria, and I walked into town for supper and back home. That night in bed, I told Heather about our conversation. So, you told her Henry was just doing to her what she did to you? That wasn't nice, and she stifled a laugh. You think she was making a run at you? That's an old-time phrase, isn't it? Make a run at you. Don't be silly. She sees how happy I am. How much you and I love each other. Besides, I told her to talk with you. That whatever you did after your divorce worked out fine for you. She can rot in hell for all I care. I went on to tell her how much I love you. Heather and I had as grand a time that night as one could have and not wake Maria. Kathy eventually moved to Florida and invited all of us down for Thanksgiving one year. She had the dinner catered, and honestly, it was awful. Nothing like the home-cooked meals we used to have. After that, the kids started alternating between spending Christmas with her and New Year's with us. We also made it a point to all get together for a big 4th of July picnic in Chestertown. The kids kept in touch with Henry, and to be fair, he took care of them financially. As for me, I only saw Henry twice after that. Once at Lila's wedding, and again at Evan's. When Derek married Ella, we held the ceremony in Chestertown, but Henry didn't even respond to the invitation. To his credit, though, he did send them a check a couple of weeks later. Kathy, on the other hand, well, she spent a fortune on plastic surgery over the years, trying to hold onto her looks. But no amount of surgery can change what's inside, and over time, she grew bitter and envious. Eventually, the kids decided it would be easier if she visited each of them for the holidays, rather than all of them visiting her. That way, each one took their turn with her, but none of them had to deal with her too often. They tell me she's had a string of lovers over the years, but none of them stuck around for long. It hasn't been a happy life for her. As for me and mine, we're good. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Morning light filtered through the curtains, and the remnants of a relentless headache forced me out of bed. I stumbled into the bathroom, swallowing 2 aspirin and bracing myself by the sink, hoping my queasy stomach would settle. I'm Ron Jameson, and yesterday turned my world upside down. After a long day at work, I walked into our home, unaware of the emotional wreckage waiting for me. Chrissy, my wife, looked at me with a mixture of love and sadness. She confessed she had been involved with another man for the past year. She described their relationship as a lifeline for him, a man shattered by a car accident that claimed his wife's life while he escaped unscathed. Chrissy explained how she tried to mend his broken spirit, how their connection deepened into love, and eventually, physical intimacy. She assured me her feelings for me hadn't changed and promised she would come back when this man no longer needed her. She vowed to remain present for our children and me, balancing her life between our family and her obligation to this man, who she believed would eventually move on. Her revelation felt like a sucker punch. In my stunned state, I lashed out, calling her names in a futile attempt to make sense of the betrayal. Chrissy's response was sharp. She accused me of failing to truly love and support her, throwing our wedding vows back in my face. She argued that if I loved her, I would accept this situation, as painful as it was. The conversation left me grappling with a storm of emotions, questioning everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and marriage. Chrissy was clearly disappointed and angry with me. I was furious, and to avoid punching her, I started drinking and yelling. Once I calmed down a bit, I asked how she would feel if I found another woman. "Who would want you?" Chrissy sneered. "You're an overweight middle-aged man with thinning hair." She warned that if I tried to divorce her, she'd ruin me. I was livid and confused about what to do. My mind was in total meltdown, and I couldn't think logically. I kept drinking and raging at Chrissy. She packed a bag and said, "I'm leaving to be with my lover until you calm down and accept the situation." I didn't remember much after that. Sitting on our bed, I decided to take stock. Chrissy was right. I was middle-aged, my hair was thinning, and I was about 20 pounds overweight. I couldn't change my age, but I could do something about my hair and weight. First, I needed to find out where my kids were. It was Saturday morning, so they should be home. After searching the house, I realized they weren't there. Where had Chrissy taken them? I was about to call her parents when I heard a car in the driveway. It was Chrissy's car, and I saw our kids getting out. I met Chrissy at the door. "Good, you're sober," she snapped. "Where were the kids?" I asked. "They were with me. I couldn't leave them with you." "You didn't take them to your lover's house, did you?" I hissed. "Ron, watch your language," she snapped again. "They were already there. My friend is kind, unlike you yesterday. I wouldn't dare leave them with you." "Fair point," I admitted. "But why didn't you take the kids to your parents' place?" "They weren't home," Chrissy said as she went upstairs. I followed her. "Are you here to stay or going back to your lover?" "Oh, Ron, stop being childish. I've told you how things are going to be. I won't argue about it. The discussion is over. Accept it or don't. Even though you're acting like an idiot, I still love you. When he no longer needs me, I'll be back full time." "So what do we do now?" I struggled to stay calm. "Right now, I'm packing a few things to spend a few days with my friend until you cool down and accept the situation." "What about the kids?" I hoped to shame her into staying, but it didn't work. "If you don't want to watch them, call my parents. They will." Chrissy packed another bag and left, leaving my head ready to explode. However, I knew I had to keep it together for the kids. I wasn't going to take Chrissy's affair lying down. No self-respecting man would. After Chrissy left, I checked on the kids and asked if they had any homework. They all groaned, but agreed to get started when I promised we'd visit their grandparents, Chrissy's parents, after. The kids loved going there because Pop was helping them build go-karts. Chrissy's parents, Sam and Mary, lived on a small farm nearby. Sam, a retired tinkerer, had a large workshop where they worked on the go-karts. Sometimes I'd help too, being a certified mechanic at the local Ford dealership. I wanted to talk to Chrissy's parents to see if they knew about her boyfriend and get their advice. I had always had a great relationship with them and considered them my surrogate parents, since mine lived far away. However, I was worried they might side with Chrissy. I checked that the kids were doing their homework, and it struck me how much they meant to me. Ron, the oldest at 16, was a football player, but not big enough for a college scholarship. Sally, 15, was a typical teenager and a great student. Kyle, the youngest at 11, was a joyful accident and a happy-go-lucky child. While the kids worked, I made coffee and started a list of things to do. I called my boss, Bob Clarkson, to fill him in on my situation. I had worked at the dealership since it opened 23 years ago, and Bob had been my boss for 15 years. He was sympathetic, having seen his son go through a messy divorce where his ex-wife made false accusations against him. "Damn," I said. "She is one cold witch." "Tell me about it," Bob said bitterly. "For a week we expected the police to arrest Gary. These accusations are devastating and hard to disprove. The police get scared every time a woman accuses a man. The only thing that saved Gary was his ex-mother-in-law. When Carol told her mother that Gary maltreated her granddaughter, she thought it would ruin him. Bev, known for being ruthless but fair, immediately took her granddaughter to the doctor to see if she had been maltreated. The doctor confirmed she had not. Bev went to the police and threatened to testify against her daughter if they pursued charges. She also warned Carol that she would expose her pills problems, leading to her losing custody. "God bless Bev," I said, shocked at what women could do to get their way. "Amen to that," Bob replied. "If there's anything I can do to help you, let me know. If it's within my power, I'll make it happen." I asked for the next week off, using my personal days and vacation time. Bob agreed and even offered more time if needed. "There is something else," I said. "I need a good divorce lawyer." "That's easy," Bob said. "Use the attorney my son used. He cleaned Carol's clock. Gary got primary custody, kept the house, and Carol has to pay child support. His name is Dwight Tucker. I think I have his number. The messier my son's divorce got, the more I heard Tucker's name in my sleep." Bob found Dwight Tucker's card after about a minute. I called his office, not expecting anyone to answer on a Saturday, but luck was with me. Not only was Mr. Tucker there, but his secretary told me he had a cancellation and could see me if I arrived in 30 minutes. I told the kids I had to go out for an hour and to behave. I drove to Mr. Tucker's office and made it in 20 minutes. Dwight Tucker, a good-looking man in his early or mid-30s with deep blue eyes and a welcoming smile, greeted me. I was sure he scored points with lady jurors. "What can I do for you today?" Dwight asked as I sat down. "My wife told me yesterday she's cheating on me with a younger man," I said, feeling embarrassed and angry. I explained what had happened the previous day. Dwight took notes, shaking his head. When I mentioned my wife claimed to still love me but planned to keep seeing the guy, he stopped me. "Let me get this straight," Dwight said, his eyes darkening. "Your wife says she loves you but will keep seeing this guy." Embarrassed, I nodded. "Okay, go ahead," Dwight prompted. I explained that Chrissy got angry when I refused to accept her plan. I admitted I called her a strumpet and a hooker. I painfully recounted how Chrissy laughed when I asked how she'd feel if I found another woman. She belittled me, saying no woman would want me and promised to ruin me if I tried to divorce her. "She actually said all that?" Dwight asked incredulously. "No offense, Mr. Fremont, but your wife is either extremely callous or has serious mental issues." "None taken," I sighed. "I think the same." I then told him how she left the kids at her lover's house during our argument, and they spent the night there. Dwight's head snapped up, and he smiled before jotting something down. "Now for the $64,000 question, what do you want to do?" Dwight asked, steepling his fingers. "I can't live with this situation," I replied after a moment. "I don't know if I can get past this, but I don't want to get destroyed in a divorce or lose my kids." Dwight nodded sympathetically. "That's common with women facing divorce due to their bad behavior. But I'll work hard to minimize any damage she can do. You'll get at least 50% of your joint assets. However, the courts don't care about infidelity, so you might have to pay alimony and child support." I felt deflated. Despite Dwight's assurance, it seemed I would be taken to the cleaners. "Yes, it's possible, but that's why we need to act quickly," Dwight said, studying his notes. "Your wife has abandoned the marital home and left your children at her lover's place, which is a big no-no in some courts. You currently have custody, and we can try to keep it that way. I'll seek an emergency restraining order against your wife, allowing you to stay in the house temporarily. The longer you stay, the stronger your case for primary custody. Does your wife work?" "Yes, part-time at the hospital on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays," I answered, then added, "That's probably where she met this guy." Dwight agreed and asked how much she made. I said about $25,000 a year, while I made about $80,000. "I have to ask a crucial question, and I want you to think hard," Dwight said, looking directly at me. "Do you still love her? Do you want to try to work things out?" I stared at the floor for a long time. When I looked up, tears were streaming down my face. "I do love her, but I can't accept this situation. She demeaned me and broke her vows. I just want a divorce." "Last question," Dwight said, turning to a clean sheet of paper. "Tell me about your assets." I quickly thought through our assets and explained. We had about $3,500 in checking, $44,000 in savings, and a $20,000 CD. I had roughly $150,000 in my 401k, while Chrissy had slightly less in her retirement plan from her full-time job at the hospital. Despite the hospital's generally better benefits, my company offered a superior healthcare plan, which we used. We also had 2 cars in both our names and a house with little equity, as we maxed out the loan when we bought it a few years ago. "Here's what I want you to do," Dwight said, looking ready for battle. "Withdraw half of the savings, checking, and CD amounts and put it in a separate account in your name only." "I can't touch the CD without Chrissy's signature," I explained. "No problem," Dwight said, calculating. "Take $33,750 from savings, pay as many house bills as you can from checking, cancel joint credit cards, and get a new one in your name only." "I still have a credit card from before we were married," I said. "I don't use it much because our joint card offers cash back." "Even better," Dwight smiled. "You won't need a new card." Dwight wrote a list of instructions and handed it to me. "Go to my secretary and have her call Taylor Locksmith to change your house locks. Then come back and we'll go over the next steps." Miss Carlson quickly got Taylor Locksmith on the phone. They said they'd come around noon. I returned to Dwight's office as he finished a call. "We're in luck," he said. "If I fax my paperwork today, we'll get Judge Johnson." "Why is that lucky?" I asked. "He hates cheaters," Dwight smiled. "He's an old-fashioned Bible Belt judge who despises infidelity. This works in our favor. If he wasn't available, I would have had to work harder, but Judge Johnson was a friend of my father's. He won't mind if I call him at home." Dwight stood up and offered me his hand. I shook it gratefully. "Before you head home," Dwight instructed, "go take care of your bank stuff. I'm preparing a petition for an emergency restraining order against your wife. She won't be allowed in your house or within 500 feet of you or your children. Since she's with her lover and left your kids there, that should help with the order. It might be overturned later, but by then, you'll be established as the primary caregiver. By Friday, I'll have her served with divorce papers. Then we'll see how she responds." For the first time since Chrissy dropped her bombshell, I felt like I was taking back control. The bank wasn't busy, so I quickly got a cashier's check for my share of the money and closed our joint credit card, paying off its $537 balance from the checking account. I also paid the mortgage 2 months ahead, which used up another $2,600. With the cashier's check in hand, I went to another bank and opened accounts in my name only. When I got home, the kids were watching TV. I loaded them into the car and drove to my in-laws. Sam waved from his workshop as the kids ran to him. Inside, Mary greeted me with a kiss. A minute later, Sam joined us. "I have something hard to say," I began. "Chrissy is having an affair, and I'm filing for a divorce." "I don't believe you," Sam said sharply. "What proof do you have?" "She told me," I replied softly, tears sliding down my face. Just then, the kids came in. "Please stay outside for a few minutes," I told them. "Why, Ron? Ron asked. "Because I said so," I said more sharply than I intended. Ron saw my tears and immediately pushed his siblings back out. "She told you?" Mary asked in disbelief. "Yes," I said firmly. I recounted the previous evening, including Chrissy's threats and insults. They were shocked and Sam was angry. "I still don't believe it. I'm going to call her and put it on speakerphone." Sam dialed Chrissy and put the phone on the coffee table. "Hey, Daddy," Chrissy answered brightly. "What can I do for you?" "Ron is here," Sam said. "Are you having an affair?" After a long pause, Chrissy demanded, "What did he say?" "He said you're having lovemaking with another man and that you love him." "It's complicated, Daddy," she pleaded. "I'm trying to help this man who's suffered a terrible tragedy." Sam's face turned red. "Are you having lovemaking with him or not?" "We've had lovemaking, but I still love Ron. I can't abandon this man right now. I love him too." I was stunned. Chrissy had always been a daddy's girl, and I assumed Sam would make excuses for her. "Chrissy," Sam's voice was strangled, "I never thought my daughter would become an immoral woman." "Daddy, please," Chrissy pleaded, but Sam hung up. Moments later, the phone rang again. Mary moved to answer it. "Leave it alone," Sam commanded, but Mary grabbed it anyway. Sam snatched the phone from her hand and threw it against the fireplace. "I said, leave it alone!" he screamed. She was stunned by her husband's anger and backed away. I was equally shocked. Silence filled the room as Sam and Mary processed the news. Finally, Sam hugged me. "Ron, I am so sorry. I can't believe our daughter did this to you. We will help you in any way we can. Mary will talk to her later and let you know how it goes. Right now, I'm too angry to speak with her." I had to leave to meet the locksmith. After herding the kids into the car, I hugged Sam and Mary and invited them for dinner to discuss more. On the way home, Sally burst into tears. "Are you and Mom getting a divorce?" "Where did you hear that?" I asked. "From me," Ron said defiantly. I snuck back in and listened. I sighed, realizing they deserved to know. But how to tell them without causing too much damage? Damn Chrissy. She hadn't thought about the kids when she was with her new man. "Yes, it looks like your mother and I will be getting a divorce," I said softly. "But why?" Kyle cried. "Your mother has fallen in love with another man," I explained. "You mean she's having lovemaking with another man?" Sally said through tears. "I hate her. She's a total witch." "Sally, don't say that about your mother," I admonished, though I felt the same way. The locks were changed just in time. 10 minutes later, Chrissy came roaring into the driveway. "You told my parents, didn't you? I'm sure you called me a strumpet and a hooker," Chrissy screamed. "I thought you loved me, Chrissy," I said sadly. "I love you with all my heart, but I won't accept you being with another man. You hurt me deeply when you called me an ugly middle-aged guy that no other woman would want. Your pity love I can do without. You also threatened to ruin me. How can you say you love me? If you truly believe what you're doing is right, it shouldn't matter that your parents know." Chrissy looked stricken. "Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't mean those things," she tried to apologize. "I was just angry because you called me a strumpet and a hooker. You promised to love, honor, and cherish me. Shame on you. If you loved me, you'd accept the situation. I'm not leaving you for him. I just love him too, and I'm trying to help him. He's younger and will eventually move on." "Chrissy," I said, shaking my head, "if you're going to quote our vows, remember you promised to forsake all others. A married woman doesn't sleep with young men just because they're hurting. I've accepted that you are damaged goods, and I don't want you in my life anymore. Accept it or don't. That's your choice." Chrissy turned red and seemed uncertain, but then her eyes narrowed with renewed arrogance. She was breathing hard, clearly trying to figure out her next argument. At that moment, I wished I didn't love her, but I still did. Deeply. "Ron," Chrissy said in a tone she used with the children, "stop being an idiot. I'm your wife, I love you, and I will come back to you when this man is well again." I was so sad, but my love for her had turned to pure hatred. "No, Chrissy, I don't know you. My wife was loving and faithful. You, I don't recognize. For all I know, this is just one of many affairs. I can't trust you anymore." Chrissy's face flushed with anger. "This is not an affair, and he's the first person I've been with since we married. He's hurt, and I will help him whether you agree or not. Suit yourself. I don't accept this. I don't trust you, so I will have a DNA test done on the kids to ensure they are mine." "You are a total prick," Chrissy spat. "This is going to get very ugly. Remember what I told you would happen if you try to divorce me?" "I'd rather die in poverty than be with a woman without morals," I said, looking down at her. She seemed unaware of the consequences coming her way. At that moment, a sheriff's vehicle pulled up. The deputy approached Chrissy. "Are you Chrissy Jameson?" he asked. "Yes," Chrissy responded, confused. "Ma'am, this is a restraining order. You cannot enter the house and must stay 500 feet away. Do you understand?" "But that's my home," Chrissy sputtered. "All my things are inside." "You have 15 minutes to gather your stuff," the deputy said. I nodded in agreement. "I'll take my children to the backyard," I said. "I want to see my children," Chrissy said frantically. "Ma'am," the deputy said, "the restraining order is to protect your children from you." Chrissy turned to me furious. "You did this! You're taking my children away." "No, Chrissy, you did this," I said calmly. "You abandoned our house and left our children unattended at your lover's place." "I didn't abandon our house, and he's a wonderful man," Chrissy screamed. "I'm helping him by sleeping with him." "If he's so wonderful, go live with him and give him your love, or does he just want to use you for cheap pleasure?" I responded, more for the deputy's benefit than Chrissy's. I took the kids to the backyard and told them their mother was gathering her things to take to her new man's house, but I would let them see her before she left. When I brought them out front, Kyle was crying hard and rushed into his mother's arms, begging her not to leave. "Please, Ron," Chrissy sobbed. "Can't you see what you're doing to the children?" Anger flared in me, but I forced it down. "Don't talk about the kids. I haven't done anything to them. You took them to your lover's house while you were with him." "Ron, why can't you understand that I can't abandon him?" Chrissy said, crying. "Chrissy, you already abandoned your husband, your kids, and your home. It's time we did the same to you. You didn't consider the consequences of your actions, and now you're facing them." Ron Jr. asked, "Why?" Chrissy tried to explain to her son, but it was clear he didn't believe her. Sally, however, let her mother have it. "You're nothing but a selfish witch," she said, spitting on her mother's face. I had to grab Sally to prevent her from punching Chrissy and demanded she apologize, but she refused. Chrissy was blindsided and dropped to the ground, sobbing. Sally and Chrissy had been clashing lately, which I thought was just teenage rebellion. Now I feared Chrissy had permanently damaged their relationship. As I held Sally, Chrissy got up, ran to her car, and drove away, banging the steering wheel. Kyle tried to run after her, screaming, "Mommy, please don't leave us." Ron Jr. caught him and brought him back. The deputy looked at me sadly. "Mr. Jameson, I am really sorry for what you're going through." That night, Sam and Mary came over for dinner. I planned to grill burgers, but Mary took over the kitchen and made meatloaf and her famous macaroni and cheese, which the kids loved. While Mary cooked, Sam and I had a couple of beers in the living room. He was clearly distraught over his daughter's actions. I explained the restraining order and how Chrissy had left the kids unattended at her lover's place, which saddened Sam even more. "Mary spoke to Chrissy about an hour after you left," Sam said finally. "How did that go?" I asked. "Terrible," Sam admitted. "Mary tried to reason with Chrissy, but she's convinced she's right and we're all wrong. She thinks we're horrible people. Mary got really angry and told Chrissy not to call us anymore and that she would testify against her if it went to court." As you can imagine, the meal was very subdued. The only bright spot was when Sam invited the kids over to work on their go-karts the next day, which brought smiles to Ron Jr. and Kyle. Sally, however, sat with a pissed look and didn't eat. I let it go, knowing she was hurting as much as I was. On Friday, Chrissy was served with divorce papers at the hospital. Friends there told me she lost it, swearing at the process server and vowing to ruin me. She was sent home, or rather to her lover's house. Chrissy hired a lawyer, Amber Wright, whom Dwight knew. He said she wasn't as good as she thought. Amber tried to rescind the restraining order, but Judge Johnson only modified it, allowing Chrissy supervised visits at the house without her boyfriend present. He warned her that any violation would end her visitation rights. Chrissy was initially happy, but her joy faded when the judge ordered her to pay child support, forcing her to go back to work full-time. Despite her blow-up at the hospital, they would likely take her back due to the nursing shortage and her skills. After the hearing, the DNA results arrived. It took me almost half a day to open the envelope. When I did, I was filled with happiness. My kids were truly mine. I reread the report several times to reassure myself. I realized I would love my kids no matter what the results had been. Even if Chrissy left her lover and came home, I wouldn't forgive her. She was a bad influence and needed to be kept away from the kids. I used all my personal days and vacation time to stay with the kids. When that ran out, Chrissy's parents helped. Sam and Mary refused to talk to Chrissy until she came to her senses. After a week of multiple daily calls, Sam blocked her number. The visitation schedule was left for Chrissy and me to work out, which meant our attorneys communicated our wishes. We agreed that Chrissy could visit on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday between 6 and 7 in the evening. Mary volunteered to supervise, but I insisted on being there for the first visit to set clear rules. On the first Monday, Chrissy arrived in a car I didn't recognize, likely her lover's. She approached the house nervously and smiled tentatively. "Hello, Ron. How are you? Mother, it's good to see you." "Chrissy, you have to leave," I snapped. "The judge said your lover can't be within 500 feet of this house." Horror spread over her face. But he was just dropping me off." "Are you brain dead?" I was furious. "The judge was clear. No lover here. Tell him to leave now and I won't tell the judge." Chrissy nodded quickly and went back to the car. I walked out and copied the license plate number, then returned to the porch as the car drove off. "Okay, he'll pick me up later," Chrissy said defiantly. "Tell him to meet you down the street. I don't want him near the house." Chrissy's face filled with anger. "Ron, I'm tired of how you're treating me. You didn't have to steal money from our checking account or cancel my credit card." "Chrissy, I didn't steal anything. The money was used to pay off the credit card and make 2 mortgage payments. I wanted to ensure the kids had a place to stay while we sorted things out. As for canceling the credit card, I didn't want to be stuck with any expenses you might charge while with your lover." Chrissy's face flushed with anger and arrogance. "This is not an affair and he isn't my lover. You're being a prick." Before I could respond, Mary stepped forward and slapped Chrissy across the face. Both Chrissy and I were stunned as she stepped back, bewildered, staring at her mother. "Chrissy, if you ever disrespect Ron again, I will tear that dress off you and slap your bum red. If you want to see the kids in the living room, I'll talk to Ron first and then join you. Be warned, if you say or do anything wrong, I will throw you out of this house." Chrissy nodded meekly and went inside. "Ron, I apologize for my brain-dead daughter," Mary said sympathetically. "Thanks for sticking up for me," I said gratefully, and then I left. 2 weeks later, the restraining order was lifted, as Dwight had mentioned. By then, I was established as the primary caregiver and allowed to stay in the house. Chrissy continued seeing her lover, so her child support remained. She could have unsupervised visits with the kids in public, but couldn't take them to her lover's house or have him present. After 4 months of delays, our first court date to finalize the divorce arrived. Before the attorneys spoke, Judge Johnson asked if we had attended counseling. The attorneys admitted we hadn't, so the judge ordered 8 sessions of marital counseling. Neither Chrissy nor I opposed. I thought they were a waste of time, but didn't want to anger the judge. Chrissy seemed to believe she could convince me or the therapist that her actions were justified. The first session with therapist Ann Patterson was as I expected. Chrissy spent most of the hour explaining that what she was doing was the Christian thing to do. Ann looked shocked by Chrissy's arrogance. In the second week, Ann gently questioned Chrissy's arguments, asking if it would be fair if I started having lovemaking with another woman. I cringed, expecting an attack on my manhood, but this time, it didn't happen. Chrissy didn't answer right away, but I didn't care. During the drawn-out divorce, I made some changes. When the woman you love tells you you're not good enough, you want to prove her wrong. So I had hair transplant surgery. It cost about $4,000, and I debated it, not wanting to face teasing. But since I was still on vacation, I went for it. My hair was buzz cut, then plugs from the back were planted in the front. I stayed home for the first week, telling the kids it was a minor medical procedure. After 10 days, I looked like my old self, and my hair grew longer each week. After healing, I started exercising and running. Initially, I could only run half a mile, but eventually, I could run 10. I also joined a gym and changed our meals to healthier options. The kids complained at first, missing fast food, cookies, ice cream, and pizza. I found fun, healthy recipes online, and while some didn't turn out great, we laughed, scrapped them, and made sandwiches. Cooking together became a family activity. Despite the pain from Chrissy's betrayal, I began feeling better about myself. On my first day back at work, I got an ego boost. The receptionist, Trudy, gave me a strange look, but didn't tease me about my new hair. "Welcome back, Ron," she chirped. Then her eyes began examining me. "There's something different about you." I blushed a bit. "Oh, I've been on a diet. I've lost 18 pounds. I'm aiming to lose another 5. She laughed and nodded. "Well, it really suits you. If I weren't married, I'd be all over you." Thanks for the ego boost, but according to my wife, I'm just a middle-aged man with no lovemaking appeal. So much so, she's found herself a lover. I tried to make a joke out of it, but it fell flat. By now, everyone at the company knew about my situation. Storm clouds crossed over Trudy's eyes. "Chrissy is an idiot. Either that or she's got a screw loose. You're a great guy, Ron, and plenty of women would be thrilled to have you. Don't let Chrissy get in your head." That was the best boost I'd gotten in months. Suddenly, I didn't feel like such a loser. I snapped back to the present when Anne asked my wife again, "Chrissy, how would you feel if Ron came home and told you he was sleeping with another woman?" As I mentioned, I was waiting for Chrissy to attack my manhood. But she didn't. I did see her eyeing me during our first meeting. I guess she could no longer say that I had thinning hair and was overweight. That was another boost to my ego. Anyway, I just sat in my chair and waited as Chrissy seemed to think about what to say. She couldn't very well say that I couldn't have another woman if she had another man. "I guess if he was trying to help that woman get over some tragedy," she said with arrogance, "I would be okay with it. What if he told you that he loved this woman and that the lovemaking was very good?" "Again, I would accept it," Chrissy insisted. "However, he would have to assure me that the children and I would be taken care of." The session continued like that, with Anne trying to get Chrissy to see that her position was really ridiculous. But Chrissy refused to budge. As I feared, these sessions were just a waste of time. Chrissy was just going to use them to try to convince me that she was right. That was never going to happen. And as it was, the initial shock of what Chrissy was doing had begun to wear off. It's a funny thing about love. If it isn't nurtured, it begins to die. By the 3rd week, something had changed. Chrissy came into the session much subdued and said little. Mostly, she just listened. Whatever had changed, it had set Chrissy back a bit. Maybe she wasn't as arrogant now because Anne was calmly and compassionately challenging her premise at every point. I also saw Chrissy checking me out when she didn't think I'd notice. I continued to work out and lost a few more pounds. I'd even begun doing a lot of yard work, which had given me a great tan. A couple of months before the therapy sessions had been ordered, I made another change. I was becoming dissatisfied with my job. Oh, I loved fixing cars, and not just the engines. I got tremendous satisfaction from doing bodywork. I'd been fixing up old cars since I was 14 years old. I could do it all now. I saw owning my own business as a way to spend more time with my kids. I talked it over with Sam, and he agreed to help me. I wanted to set up my own shop and start building a business. But I couldn't just quit my job and do it. I didn't have the money to sustain us until the business took off. We'd starve before I could make a go of it. However, since Sam's farm was also in an industrial zone, he agreed to let me start my business in his workshop. Actually, Sam's tinkering shop had once been a barn for horses that he had converted. There was plenty of space for Sam and me if I got the business established. Sam agreed to lease me a piece of land on the road to build my own building. I spent time at work studying how they had things set up. The dealership was basically set up to handle a higher volume than I was anticipating. They did a little bodywork at the dealership, but much of it was subbed out. With this in mind, I scaled down what I needed in terms of tools and equipment. One thing for sure, I'd need to build a paint booth. Sam was not only okay with that, but actually helped me construct it. I spent the savings I had liberated from our joint savings plus a small loan from Sam to finance the venture. I started part-time, mostly on weekends and evenings. It was fun, and the kids would come out many times to watch or even help. I really enjoyed teaching Ron Jr. how to do things. Even Sally got her hands dirty and loved to tell her girlfriends how she helped change out an engine or help paint a Corvette. That also made her more interesting to the boys at school. I got business by word of mouth, and soon I was wondering if I shouldn't strike out full-time. That decision actually came to a head when I was told that they needed me to work over the weekend to get some backed-up workout. I couldn't do it because I had customers of my own that I needed to take care of. I figured I was going to get fired when I went in to tell Bob that I couldn't work because I had my own business obligations. "Got a minute, Bob?" I asked, poking my head into his office. "Sure, Ron." He waved me in. "I'm glad you're working this weekend. We've got 44 cars coming in on Friday that need to be thoroughly checked and prepped. We have to get them out by the end of the month." I winced slightly at that. Most people don't realize that factories offer special incentives to dealerships. If they sell a certain number of cars in a month, they get a discount off the invoice. For example, the factory might say if you sell 300 vehicles this month, we'll take $150 off your cost. That's a $45000 saving. But if the dealership sells only 299, they get nothing. This was crucial for the dealership. "That's just it, Bob," I said, feeling sweat trickle down my back. "I can't work this weekend. I've kind of started my own business on weekends and I've got commitments." "I'm sorry, Ron," Bob said curtly, "but if you can't work this weekend, I may have to let you go." "I understand, Bob," I said resignedly. "I just hope there are no hard feelings. I've been trying to build up a business of my own. I want to spend more time with my kids and make some extra money for their college funds. I'll clean out my locker." "I hate to lose you, Ron," Bob said sadly. "Tell me about your business. Where are you located and what kind of jobs are you doing?" I explained that I had set up my operation on my father-in-law's property and described the equipment and tools I had. I was set up to do almost any kind of car repairs, including bodywork. "Go get yourself a cup of coffee and then come back here," Bob said, reaching for his phone. I didn't want any coffee, so I went to my locker and put my things in a box. Losing this job meant it was going to be tough for a while. The kids would have to be put on Chrissy's health insurance plan as I had taken her off mine. Still, I was confident I could make it. I was turning away almost as much business as I was taking in. Bob motioned me into his office when he saw me coming down the hall. "I've got a deal for you, Ron," he said excitedly. "If you work this weekend, we'll reimburse you for any money you lose because your customers are unhappy." "No," I shook my head. "I couldn't do that to my customers." "Hold on. I'm not done," Bob said, sliding a piece of paper across the desk. It was an independent contractor's agreement. "I really need you this weekend. I also think you can convince your customers to wait a few days. If you can do that and your shop passes our inspection, we'll hire you as an independent contractor to do some of our body work." I was stunned, but took the deal. After that weekend, I was basically working full-time at my business. Occasionally, I would go into the dealership if they had a problem and I wasn't busy. Also, Sam started helping me part-time and Mary agreed to do my books. I was now making more money than I ever had working for the dealership. The only thing still messed up in my life was my marriage, and after the 4th counseling session, I wanted to end them. I was pretty much beyond caring what Chrissy was doing with her new love. Oh, don't get me wrong, it still stung when I thought about my wife being with another man, but I wasn't thinking about it as often. In our 5th session, I decided to go on the offensive. I figured if I attacked Chrissy hard enough, she might choose to end these useless sessions. I decided to confront her on the most hurtful things she had said, that I was too ugly to attract another woman. When Anne asked if I had anything to say, I lit into Chrissy. "Chrissy, I've decided that you're not only selfish, but also very nasty. How dare you tell the man you supposedly love that he's an ugly, middle-aged man no woman would ever want? You hurt me in a way that I don't think I'll ever get over." "Oh God, Ron, I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so ashamed I ever said that. If I could take it back, I would. I do love you." "Just not enough to give up your lover. Keep your sorries to yourself. You'll need them more than I do," I snapped back. Chrissy burst into uncontrollable sobbing. No matter what Anne or I said, we couldn't calm her down. Eventually, Anne called an end to the session but gave us homework to do before the next one. I wasn't looking forward to it because I figured these sessions were a total waste of time. The homework was to answer a series of questions. Some made sense, like how was our relationship with our parents? How was our bed life? Some questions didn't make sense to me, like what my favorite food and drink were or what kind of vehicle I drove. But one question really made me sit back and think. It was, if I could change one thing, what would it be? I'd been working on the questionnaire the night after the last session, but put it away after I read that question. I wanted to think about it for a bit. The next day, I finally wrote that I wished I had been a better husband, so my wife wouldn't have stopped loving me. We handed in our papers at the next session, but Anne didn't even look at them. Instead, she started by asking if we had any questions or if there was something we'd like to discuss. I'd like to ask Chrissy a question, I said immediately. Anne nodded at me, and I turned to face my estranged wife. Chrissy, I don't see that we're getting anywhere with these sessions. You've made it clear that you're not going to leave your friend Bruce Hartman, and that leaves no chance for reconciliation. Why don't we just stop this and get the divorce done? How do you know his name? Chrissy asked in shock. That first time you came over to visit the kids, I got his license number. After that, it wasn't hard to find out his name, but it doesn't really matter. I have no interest in getting back at him or even talking to him. I just don't care anymore. I want to move on. Chrissy looked up at me with the saddest eyes I think I've ever seen. I hated seeing her in pain, and I wanted to go over and hug her, but I knew that wouldn't solve anything. So I continued. I know your lawyer hasn't been happy with the settlement I've offered so far. Well, I've told my attorney to offer some alternatives. I'm willing to give you more visitation with the kids. I'm also offering to pay you $1,000 a month in alimony for 3 years. I just want you out at any cost. I watched Chrissy for a reaction, but all I saw was terrible sadness. She had made it perfectly clear that she wasn't going to stop seeing the guy, and I couldn't and wouldn't accept my wife having lovemaking with another man. For the life of me, I just didn't understand how she could possibly think that I would live with a situation like that. At this point, it didn't matter. I just wanted out. I decided to push to end this farce. I know that what you said about me was partially true. It did hurt like hell when you said it, and I did tell you that I didn't think I'd ever get over that. But as time goes on, I realize that I am getting over it. Anyway, as you can see, I've tried to fix myself up. I don't think that I'm the man you thought so little of when you took up with Bruce. I've also started dating. After we're divorced, you can take care of your gentleman friend for as long as you want. But I think it's time to end this, if for no other reason than so you can start to rebuild a relationship with your kids. With that, Chrissy burst into tears and fled the room. Anne looked as stunned as I was. Finally, Anne composed herself and told me that she wanted to see Chrissy by herself for the next session, and then me alone for the last session. With a sigh, I agreed. When Chrissy unloaded all this on me, I was furious and filled with hate. But now, months after the fact, I was just worn out. I could see the pain this whole thing was inflicting on not only me, but Chrissy, her parents, and most of all, our children. I wanted that to stop. I also was no longer furious that Chrissy was having lovemaking with some guy. When I arrived for my final meeting with Anne, I was not only happy that Chrissy wasn't there, but also glad that this would be the end of the counseling. Ron, I want to commend you for your restraint through all these sessions, Anne began. I know this entire situation has been unbelievably painful for you. After meeting with Chrissy last week, I think I finally understand what happened to your wife. I was now sitting on the edge of my chair. Finally, maybe I would learn why Chrissy decided to destroy our marriage. Do you remember the homework I gave you? She asked. I just nodded. I had forgotten about it and figured it had been of little value in these counseling sessions. The way you both answered one particular question surprised me, Anne said as she pulled 2 pieces of paper from her folder. The question was, if you could change one thing, what would it be? Do you remember that? I nodded. You answered that you wished you could have been a better husband so that your wife wouldn't have stopped loving you. When Chrissy heard that, she broke down and cried harder than ever. It took me quite a while to calm her down. I didn't know what to think, say, or do, so I just sat there. Ron, your wife never stopped loving you. Yeah, that's why she continues sleeping with Bruce, because she loved me so much, I said sarcastically. Anne gave me a disapproving look, but then sighed. Ron, what I discovered about Chrissy was that she was going through a severe midlife crisis. As the children were getting older, Chrissy felt her life slipping away from her. She is, and I suspect she has always been, a warm and caring person. Somewhere along the line, she found Bruce, who needed her terribly. She confused her desire to be young again and Bruce's terrible need for forgiveness over his wife's pass away for love. That doesn't change anything, I protested. She's still sleeping with Bruce. Actually, no, she's not, Ron. Really? This was news to me. Then why didn't Chrissy tell me? Anne sighed. I know this isn't going to change your feelings at this point, but you need to know the whole truth. Bruce left town the same day you told Chrissy you were going to start dating and just wanted to get on with the divorce. She figured she had already lost you. I thought about it, but Anne was right. It didn't change my mind. Too much had happened to go back. I had my life on track now, and I wanted to move forward. I could never trust Chrissy again, and I didn't want to live like that. Most importantly, I wanted the kids to start bonding with their mother again. Sally's grades had slipped badly since this mess began, and she was still angry at her mother. Kyle had become sullen, withdrawn, and was acting out in school. This was perhaps the worst consequence of Chrissy's actions. Kyle was no longer the happy-go-lucky kid he once was. Ron Jr. handled it the best. He wasn't angry or sullen, but whenever his mother's name came up, he changed the subject. Maybe I'm wrong. Perhaps his reaction is worse than the two girls. I just don't know. One last thing, Ron, Anne said, pulling out the second piece of paper. This is Chrissy's answer to the question about changing one thing. She wrote that if she could change one thing, it would be that she never met Bruce Hartman. The divorce went through, and as per the agreement, Chrissy visited the kids on Wednesdays and Fridays. I made sure to take the kids out on Fridays before Chrissy arrived. At first, our interactions were formal and awkward, but then we started sharing meals together with the kids. And one evening, Chrissy asked if she could stay the night. No, I answered with a chuckle. The bed in the spare room isn't that comfortable. It's better if you go back to your place. And next time, don't think I'd ever be alone with you. As for Bruce Hartman, his story wasn't completely true. His wife died driving away from him after finding him cheating. She left in rage, speeding, and died in a car crash. Why did he leave town? I guess it was because of a severe striking he took outside a local bar. 5 broken ribs, 1 busted kneecap, 5 missing teeth, and 2 busted nuts. I had to call in a favor with some friends. It was worth it. The striking ensured he would never be with another woman, let alone please any. As for Chrissy, she gradually restored a loving relationship with her children, or I should say with Sally and Kyle. No matter what Chrissy did, there was always a distance between her and Ron Jr. I would have thought Sally would hold a grudge, but she was the first to fully embrace her mother's return. Chrissy finally mended her fences with her parents, though, like Ron Jr., there was a slight coolness with her father. Most Sundays, we'd have dinner there like a family, but we weren't. Chrissy kept apologizing for everything that had happened. I finally told her to please stop. I will never forgive you, and it's useless to try, I told her. Oh, please, Chrissy, stop being so childish. I told you how things are going to be. I have no intention of arguing about it. The discussion is over. Accept it or don't. That's your choice. We are never getting back together again. Even if you were the last woman on the planet and the fate of mankind depended on me making love to you, I'd pass. 3 years later, I got married. I married Sally's teacher. How we met and everything that happened is a story for another time. But what matters is that the kids love her and have accepted her as part of the family. Chrissy still hasn't accepted that I've moved on. Well, I'm not going to do anything about her. After all, the discussion was over. She either accepts it or she doesn't.
To our amazing Cheating Tales Lab family, welcome and thank you for joining us. Your support means the world. Quick question. Where are you listening from today? Which city? Which country? Drop it below. Now, let's dive into today's story. The autumn sun cast long shadows through the bay windows of Howard Graves' home office as he reviewed the quarterly reports from his investment firm. The markets had been volatile, but his company had outperformed expectations yet again. His fingers drummed absently against the mahogany desk, a wedding gift from his wife Stacy 13 years ago. The doorbell's chime broke his concentration. Howard glanced at his watch. 6:45 p.m. He wasn't expecting anyone, and Stacy was upstairs getting ready for their weekly date night. The kids were at their after-school activities, the twins at baseball practice and Sarah at her piano lesson. Rising from his desk, Howard straightened his charcoal suit jacket. At 45, he maintained the same disciplined physique that had earned him a wrestling scholarship to Yale. The morning runs and evening workouts weren't just about health, they were about control, about maintaining the edge that had helped him build his firm from nothing. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. Coming, Howard called out, his deep voice echoing through the foyer. Through the frosted glass panels flanking the front door, he could make out multiple silhouettes. Opening the door, he found himself face to face with his younger brother Eric, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits that screamed, "Corporate lawyer." Eric? Howard's initial smile faded as he noticed his brother's expression, cold, calculated, with a hint of something that looked disturbingly like triumph. What's this about? Eric, 3 years Howard's junior, had always been the more conventionally handsome of the two. Where Howard was solid and strong, Eric was lean and sharp, with the kind of looks that open doors in the finance world. But right now, those good looks were twisted into something ugly. "Hello, brother." Eric's voice carried a note of malice that Howard had never heard before. "May we come in? We have some family matters to discuss." Howard stepped aside, his instinct screaming that something was very wrong. The lawyers moved with practiced efficiency, their Italian leather shoes clicking against the hardwood floors as they entered his home. "Your wife," Eric announced, turning to face Howard with a smirk, "promised me a wild night 13 years ago." He paused, savoring the moment like a predator toying with its prey. "And she delivered. Multiple times over the years, actually." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Howard's mind refused to process them for a moment, but Eric wasn't finished. "You see, big brother, while you were building your perfect little life, playing house with my leftovers, I was fucking your wife. And not just once or twice, we've been at it for years. Since before you even married her." One of the lawyers stepped forward, extending a thick manila envelope. "Mr. Graves, these documents require your immediate attention." Howard took the envelope, his movements mechanical. Inside, he found a DNA report. His eyes scanned the document, each word a hammer blow to his world. Probability of paternity, combined paternity index, prior probability. The conclusions were highlighted in yellow. For Jason Graves, age 13, alleged father Eric Graves, probability of paternity, 99.99%. For James Graves, age 13, alleged father Eric Graves, probability of paternity, 99.99%. For Sarah Graves, age 10, alleged father Eric Graves, probability of paternity, 99.99%. "No," Howard whispered, then louder, "No. This is impossible." "Oh, it's very possible," a familiar voice called from the top of the stairs. Howard turned to see Stacy standing there in her silk robe, her blonde hair falling perfectly around her shoulders. She'd always known how to make an entrance. "He's right, Howard," she continued, descending the stairs with deliberate steps. Her voice carried no trace of remorse, only a cold satisfaction. "I've been lying for years. The kids, the marriage, all of it one big, beautiful lie." She reached the bottom of the stairs and walked over to Eric, sliding her arm through his with practiced familiarity. "I only married you for your money, Howard. Eric's always been better. In every way that matters." She smiled, a predatory thing that transformed her beautiful face into something cruel. Bigger bank account, bigger ambitions, and well, bigger in other ways too. Howard's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white. "Get out," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "Both of you, get out of my house." The second lawyer cleared his throat. "About that, Mr. Graves." He produced another envelope. "This is an eviction notice. The house, being in both your and Mrs. Graves' names due to marriage laws, is being contested. Additionally, my clients have filed motions to freeze your assets pending investigation of alleged financial misconduct." Howard's mind raced. The house he remembered now. 3 years ago, Stacy had convinced him to put it in both their names. "For tax purposes," she'd said, "and because it shows how much you trust me." "You can't do this," Howard said, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. "We already have," Eric gloated. "You see, brother, while you were playing family man, Stacy and I were planning. Every trust fund you set up for the kids, every document where you claimed paternity, every financial decision you made thinking you were protecting your family, we documented all of it." Stacy moved to the living room, picking up a framed family photo from the mantel. "You should see your face right now, Howard. Did you really think someone like me would be satisfied with someone like you? Eric and I have been laughing about it for years, how you never questioned why the kids look so much like him, how you never noticed our business lunches, how blind you were to everything. Get out of our house, loser," she smirked, dropping the photo. The frame shattered on the hardwood floor, spiderweb cracks spreading across the glass like the fractures in Howard's world. "Mr. Graves," the first lawyer spoke again, "we'll need your preliminary response to these filings within 48 hours. Mrs. Graves will be seeking full custody of the children, substantial alimony, and compensation for 13 years of fraudulent paternity claims. Howard stood perfectly still, his mind already shifting from shock to calculation. Years of business negotiations had taught him to think clearly even in crisis. "You've made one crucial mistake," he said quietly. Eric laughed. "Oh, and what's that, big brother? You thought you could break me." Howard's voice was ice cold. "You thought 13 years of lies would shatter me. But you forgot something important about me, little brother. I don't break. I don't bend. And I never, ever lose." Big words from a man who's about to lose everything, Stacy sneered. "The kids aren't yours, the house isn't yours, and soon, half your company won't be yours either." Howard's phone buzzed a text from the Twins' baseball coach. "Practice ending early due to rain. They'd be home in 20 minutes. "The children will be home soon," Howard announced, his tone businesslike. "I suggest you all leave before they arrive. We wouldn't want them to see their mother and biological father for what they really are." "Not yet, anyway. Are you threatening us?" Eric stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "Threatening you?" Howard's laugh was devoid of humor. "No, Eric. A threat implies uncertainty. I'm making you a promise. You want to play games? Fine. But remember, you chose this battlefield, not me. And unlike you, I don't need to hide behind lawyers and lies to win. We have DNA proof," Stacy spat. "We have documentation. We have everything we need to destroy you." "What you have," Howard replied calmly, "is an impressive collection of evidence proving you've committed multiple felonies. But please, continue explaining your master plan. I'm sure the prosecutors will find it fascinating." For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Eric's face, but he covered it quickly with another sneer. "Come on, Stacy. Let's leave Howard to pack his things. He'll be needing a much smaller place soon." As they moved toward the door, Howard called out, "Eric?" His brother turned. "Remember when we were kids, and you stole my baseball card collection? Remember what happened after that?" Eric's face paled slightly. As children, Howard had spent 6 months systematically dismantling everything Eric cared about: his friendships, his reputation at school, his prized possessions, until Eric finally returned the cards, completely broken. "You're not kids anymore," Stacy said, but her voice wavered slightly. "No," Howard agreed. "We're not. And this time, you've taken something far more precious than baseball cards." He smiled, and both Eric and Stacy took an involuntary step back. "I'll be keeping the house, by the way. You might want to have your lawyers review the actual property documents. The ones in the safe, not the copies you've been working with." "What do you mean?" Eric demanded. "Leave," Howard said simply. "Before the children get home. We can discuss the rest through proper channels." He turned to the lawyers. "Gentlemen, I'll have my legal team contact you tomorrow. I suggest you review your client's evidence very carefully before proceeding. Knowingly submitting fraudulent documents to the court is a serious offense." After they left, Howard stood in the foyer, looking at the shattered family photo on the floor. He pulled out his phone and made 3 calls, one to his lawyer, one to his sister Kelly, and one to a private investigator he'd worked with before. The sound of rain outside grew stronger, and Howard could hear the twins' carpool pulling into the driveway. He took a deep breath, straightened his tie, and prepared to protect his children from the storm that was coming. They were his kids, regardless of DNA, and he would make sure they survived this with as little trauma as possible. As he opened the door to greet Jason and James, Howard allowed himself a small, grim smile. Eric and Stacy thought they'd won with their dramatic reveal, but they'd forgotten the most important lesson Howard had learned in business. The person who throws the first punch rarely wins the fight. The real battle was just beginning. The key card clicked as Howard entered his temporary residence at the Madison Apartments. The 1-bedroom unit was a far cry from his 5-bedroom colonial, but it served its purpose. He'd chosen it specifically for its proximity to both his office and the children's schools. Setting his briefcase on the modest dining table, Howard loosened his tie and pulled out his phone. 3 weeks had passed since Eric and Stacy's dramatic revelation, and he'd spent every moment since then methodically preparing his counterattack. "Marcus? It's Howard Graves. Remember that favor you owe me from the Peterson audit?" He paused, listening to the forensic accountant's response. "I need your expertise." Off the books. Marcus Finley's gravelly voice came through the speaker. The Peterson case saved my career, Howard. Name the time and place. Tomorrow, 7 a.m. The Capitol Grill. Private booth. Howard's tone left no room for negotiation. Bring your best equipment. We're going hunting. The next morning, Marcus arrived carrying a sleek laptop bag and the world-weary expression of someone who'd seen too many financial crimes to be shocked anymore. At 60, with steel-gray hair and reading glasses perpetually perched on his nose, he looked more like a kindly grandfather than one of the most feared forensic accountants in the business. So, Marcus said after their coffee arrived, "Tell me what we're looking for." Howard slid a USB drive across the table. Everything. Bank records, property transfers, communication patterns. My wife and brother have been playing a long game. I need to know how long and how deep it goes. Marcus plugged in the drive, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Your wife, Stacy. She had access to your home office? Yes. And my phone, computer, everything. Howard's jaw tightened. I trusted her completely. That's usually how it starts, Marcus muttered, his eyes scanning data streams. Then he stopped, frowning. Howard, look at this. The screen showed a pattern of recordings, hundreds of them, all carefully labeled and dated. She's been recording your business calls, Marcus explained. High-quality audio files stored on a secure cloud server. And look at the access logs. They're being downloaded regularly from an IP address registered to Eric's brokerage firm. Howard finished, his voice cold. Over the next 2 hours, they uncovered the extent of the surveillance. Stacy hadn't just been recording calls. She'd photographed documents, copied emails, and maintained detailed notes about Howard's business strategies and client meetings. This isn't just about the affair or the kids, Marcus concluded, pushing back from his laptop. They've been using your business intelligence for insider trading. Eric's trading patterns match perfectly with your firm's major moves. Every time you made a significant investment decision, he was one step ahead, Howard nodded. Give me everything. Every trade, every recording, every document access. Marcus hesitated. Howard, this is bigger than forensic accounting. You need someone who can dig deeper into their personal lives, someone who can... Already on it. Howard pulled out his phone and dialed another number. Alberto?
It's time.
Alberto Barrera had been a homicide detective before moving into private investigation. He'd helped Howard vet potential business partners over the years, and his reputation for discretion was legendary. They met that afternoon in a small coffee shop in Georgetown. Your brother's done this before, Alberto announced without preamble, sliding a thick folder across the table. 2 other families, similar pattern. Married women, wealthy husbands, kids involved. He and the wives would plan it for years, gathering evidence, setting up the perfect trap. Howard opened the folder, studying the photographs and reports. Why didn't they press charges? Pride. Shame. And Eric was careful. He made sure the husbands had something to lose if everything came to light. One guy had been skimming corporate accounts. Another had an illegal offshore betting operation. Alberto leaned forward. But you? Your records are clean. That's probably why they needed so much time to set this up. Get me everything on the other families, Howard instructed. And I mean everything. School records for the kids, medical histories, financial statements. If Eric so much as jaywalked near their homes, I want to know about it. As Alberto left, Howard's phone buzzed. A text from his sister Kelly. The kids miss you. Sarah asked about you at piano practice today. His fingers hovered over the phone. The hardest part of all this was maintaining distance from the children while he built his case. But he couldn't risk Stacy using their interactions against him in court. Instead of responding, he made another call. Renee? I need your expertise. Renee Foster had been Howard's head of cybersecurity for 5 years. She arrived at his apartment that evening, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, carrying a laptop that could probably hack the Pentagon. I ran deep scans on both their email histories, she reported, setting up her equipment. It goes back 15 years, Howard. They started planning this before you even met Stacy. Show me. The emails were damning. Eric and Stacy had met at a finance conference in Chicago. They'd started their affair immediately, but it wasn't just about sex. They'd strategized, planned, documented everything. Look at this email from 15 years ago. Renee pointed to the screen. Target acquired. He's perfect, rich, trusting, and too focused on work to notice anything suspicious. That's from Stacy to Eric. 3 days after she met you. Howard's expression remained neutral, but his hands clenched under the table. The twins' conception wasn't an accident either. Renee continued, pulling up more emails. They planned it specifically to ensure maximum emotional impact. They knew having Eric's children would give them leverage over both your emotions and your finances. The children's sports activities, Howard mused. They used those as cover for their meetings? Renee nodded, typing rapidly. Encrypted messages hidden in routine emails about baseball practice and piano lessons. They were careful, but they got sloppy toward the end. Started using their phones for direct communication. I've recovered some deleted texts. She pulled up a series of messages that made Howard's blood boil. Eric. He actually thinks they're his kids. What a fool. Stacy. Playing happy family with him makes me sick. But it'll be worth it when we take everything. Eric. Just a few more months. Then we destroy him completely. There's more, Renee said quietly. They've been using the children's trust funds as collateral for loans. High-risk investments in Eric's name. If those investments had failed, the kids would have lost everything, Howard finished. Forward all of this to Franklin Novak. My lawyer needs to see it immediately. The next morning, Howard met with Franklin in his office. The attorney had aged well over 30 years of practice, his silver hair and Brooks Brothers suits projecting an image of trustworthy authority. This is unprecedented, Franklin said, reviewing the evidence. The insider trading alone is enough for federal charges. But when you add the fraud, the embezzlement through falsified invoices that Renee uncovered, Howard, they're looking at serious prison time. Good, Howard replied. But I want this done right. No mistakes, no loopholes, no chance for them to slip away. Franklin nodded, making notes. We'll need to coordinate with the SEC for the insider trading charges. The FBI will want to look at the fraud aspects. And the district attorney's office will be very interested in the pattern of behavior with those other families. How long to build an airtight case? A month, maybe 2. We need to be thorough. They'll fight back hard when they realize what's coming. Franklin looked up from his notes. What about the children? Howard's face softened slightly. They stay protected. Whatever happens, their trust funds remain untouched. I want them taken care of, regardless of DNA. And Stacy's claims about paternity fraud? Let her make them, Howard said coldly. Every time she claims I'm not their father, she'll be admitting to insurance fraud. She listed me as the father on every policy, every school document, every medical form. Let her try to explain that to a federal judge. As Howard left Franklin's office, his phone buzzed again. A text from Stacy. The kids keep asking about you. Getting harder to explain why Daddy abandoned them. Ready to negotiate yet? Howard didn't respond, but he smiled. Let them think they were winning. Let them believe their plan was working perfectly. The time would come soon enough when they'd realize just how badly they'd underestimated him. That evening, he met with his entire team, Marcus, Alberto, Renee, and Franklin in a private room at the Capitol Grill. The evidence was spread across the table like pieces of a complex puzzle. One last thing, Alberto said, pulling out a final report. I found something interesting about Eric's brokerage license. There are some irregularities in his initial application. If we pull that thread, do it, Howard ordered. Pull every thread. Check every document. I want no surprises when we move. Marcus raised his glass. To justice? Howard shook his head. To patience. And to making sure they never hurt another family again. As his team discussed strategy, Howard's mind drifted to the children. Jason's baseball games, James's science projects, Sarah's piano recitals. DNA didn't matter. They were his kids, and he would make sure they had a future free from their mother's manipulations and their biological father's schemes. The next morning, Howard received a call from his building's security. Eric had tried to gain access to his office, claiming he needed to discuss family matters. Your brother left a message, his secretary reported. He says you're only hurting yourself by dragging this out. He and Stacy are willing to be generous if you cooperate. Howard's response was simple. Tell him my lawyers will be in touch. Let them think he was beaten. Let them believe their plan was flawless. Howard Graves had learned long ago that the best revenge wasn't served cold, it was served with precision, patience, and absolute certainty. As he reviewed the mounting evidence with his team, Howard remembered something his father had told him years ago. In business and in life, son, never throw the first punch. But when you hit back, make sure they stay down. Eric and Stacy had thrown their punch. Now Howard was methodically assembling the evidence that would not just knock them down, but destroy everything they'd built through lies and manipulation. The investigation continued, each day bringing new revelations of their deception. Howard maintained his distance from the children, though it pained him. Better a few months of confusion than a lifetime of watching their mother and biological father manipulate them for financial gain. As Alberto dug deeper into Eric's past, more victims emerged. Women who'd been used as pawns in previous schemes, business partners who'd been betrayed, families that had been torn apart. None had fought back effectively, but their stories added weight to the growing case. Your brother's gotten bolder over the years, Alberto reported during their weekly update. The patterns are consistent, but the scale keeps increasing. You're his biggest target yet. And his last, Howard replied firmly. Renee's cyber investigation revealed more layers of deception. Stacy had been systematically copying and forwarding business documents for years, using a sophisticated system of hidden email accounts and encrypted messages. She didn't just record your calls, Renee explained, showing him the data trails. She installed keyloggers on your devices, copied entire hard drives, even photographed documents in your briefcase while you slept. Marcus's financial analysis painted a picture of long-term planning and calculated deception. They've been moving money through a series of shell companies, he reported, preparing for this moment for years. But they made mistakes, got careless with the documentation. Franklin worked tirelessly to organize the evidence into a cohesive legal strategy. We're not just building a defense against their claims, he explained. We're constructing a comprehensive criminal case. When we move, they won't know what hit them. Howard maintained his outward appearance of a man under siege. He let Eric and Stacy see him looking tired at school events, appeared distracted at business meetings, gave them just enough signs of breaking to feed their confidence. Inside his temporary apartment, however, he worked with cold precision, organizing the evidence that would ensure their destruction. The walls were covered with timelines, financial records, and surveillance photos. Every piece of information was another nail in their coffin. As the investigation phase neared its end, Howard received one final piece of evidence from Alberto, a recording of Eric and Stacy discussing their plans at what they thought was a secure location. Howard's always been weak, Eric's voice dripped with contempt. All that talk about family and trust. Pathetic. He made it so easy, Stacy laughed. Playing devoted husband and father while we built the trap. I almost feel sorry for him. No, you don't, Eric replied. You're right, Stacy agreed. I don't. When this is over, we'll have everything, the money, the house, the kids as leverage. And Howard? He'll have nothing. Just like he deserves. Howard listened to the recording twice, his expression unchanging. Then he made one final call to Franklin. Are we ready? Everything's in place, Franklin confirmed. The SEC is prepared to move on the insider trading. The FBI has enough evidence for multiple fraud charges. And the district attorney is very interested in the pattern of behavior with the other families. Good, Howard said quietly. Then it's time to let them think they've won. The pieces were in place. The evidence was secured. Now it was time for the final phase of Howard's response to their betrayal. Eric and Stacy thought they'd orchestrated the perfect plan to destroy him. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. Howard sat in his small apartment, surrounded by stacks of financial documents. His signature, freshly dried, marked the bottom of each page. To anyone watching, it appeared he was surrendering everything he'd built. Are you certain about this strategy? Franklin Novak asked, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. Once we start this play, there's no going back. They expect me to fight the eviction, Howard replied, his voice steady. They're prepared for a legal battle over the house and assets. What they're not prepared for is total capitulation. Franklin gathered the signed documents into his briefcase. The meeting to finalize the asset transfer is scheduled for tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eric and Stacy's lawyers confirmed their attendance. And our other guests? The SEC agents will be in position. FBI too. The district attorney's office is coordinating with both agencies. Franklin paused. You know they'll try to hurt you through the children one last time. Howard's expression hardened. The kids are staying with Kelly this week. Stacy agreed, thinking it would give her time to clear out my things from the house. A cold smile crossed his face. She always underestimated my relationship with my sister. The next morning, Howard dressed with particular care: charcoal suit, white shirt, blue tie. The same outfit he'd worn the day Eric and Stacy had arrived with their revelation. He wanted them to remember this. The conference room at Franklin's law firm filled slowly. Eric and Stacy arrived first, both wearing expressions of barely concealed triumph. Stacy had dressed expensively, no doubt using the credit cards she thought Howard couldn't track. Eric wore his usual banker's armor bespoke suit, gold watch, shark smile. Brother, Eric nodded mockingly. Ready to sign everything away? Howard didn't respond, taking his seat silently. Their lawyers spread documents across the mahogany table, pointing out signature lines with efficient precision. Before we begin, Franklin announced, there are some additional parties who need to be present for this transaction. The conference room door opened. 3 men and a woman entered, their expressions professionally neutral. What is this? Stacy demanded. Allow me to introduce Special Agent Carter from the SEC, Franklin said calmly, along with Special Agent Rodriguez from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division and Assistant District Attorney Chun. Eric's smile faltered. This is a private family matter. These people have no business. Oh, but they do, Howard spoke for the first time. You see, this isn't just about a house or some bank accounts. This is about 15 years of fraud, insider trading, and criminal conspiracy. The color drained from Stacy's face. You're bluffing. You have nothing. Howard nodded to Franklin, who opened his laptop. The large screen on the conference room wall flickered to life, displaying emails, financial records, and surveillance photos. Nothing? Howard's voice was ice. Let's start with the insider trading. Every major trade you made, Eric, perfectly timed with information Stacy stole from my office. Hundreds of recorded calls, thousands of photographed documents. You can't prove, Eric began. Then there's the insurance fraud, Howard continued as if Eric hadn't spoken. Every medical form, every school document, every insurance policy where Stacy listed me as the father while knowing I wasn't. That's federal fraud, by the way. For each document, Stacy's lawyer leaned over to whisper urgently in her ear. She shoved him away. The embezzlement through falsified invoices was clever, Howard acknowledged. Having shell companies bill my firm for non-existent services, then routing the money through offshore accounts. But you got sloppy with the paperwork. Eric stood abruptly. This meeting is over. We're leaving. Sit down, Mr. Graves, Special Agent Rodriguez said quietly. The only place you're going is our field office. You planned this, Stacy hissed at Howard. All of it. The quiet surrender. Signing over the assets, it was a trap. Like the trap you and Eric planned for 15 years? Howard's voice remained calm. The one where you married me for my money, had my brother's children, and documented everything so you could destroy me? The evidence continued to scroll across the screen. Bank statements showing money laundering, encrypted messages planning the deception, DNA tests proving the calculated nature of the children's conception. But the most damning evidence, Howard concluded, comes from your other victims. Eric's head snapped up. What other victims? The screen showed photographs of other families, other homes, other lives destroyed. You've done this before, brother. But your previous targets were too ashamed to fight back, too worried about their reputations. I'm not. Special Agent Carter stepped forward. Mr. Graves, Eric Graves, you're under arrest for multiple counts of securities fraud, insider trading, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Mrs. Graves, you're under arrest for wire fraud, insurance fraud, and embezzlement. You can't do this, Stacy screamed as handcuffs clicked around her wrists. Those are my children. You can't take my children. They were never just bargaining chips, Howard said quietly. They're children who deserve better than parents who saw them as weapons in a financial scheme. As Eric and Stacy were led away, Howard remained seated, watching them go. Franklin dismissed their shocked lawyers, who practically ran from the room. The press will have this within the hour, Franklin warned. Good. Howard stood, straightening his tie. Let everyone see what they really are. The next few weeks passed in a blur of headlines and legal proceedings. Brothers' betrayal leads to major financial crimes bust splashed across every financial paper. Eric's previous victims came forward, emboldened by Howard's stand. The evidence was overwhelming. The hardest part was explaining everything to the children. Howard arranged for family counseling with a child psychologist who specialized in parental betrayal cases. The initial sessions were brutal. "So you're not really our dad?" Jason had asked, his 13-year-old face struggling to remain stoic. "Biology doesn't make a father," Howard replied firmly. "Love does. And I have loved you, all of you, since the day you were born. That will never change." The twins processed the news differently. James threw himself into his science projects, while Jason quit baseball, unable to face the memories of how his mother and biological father had used the sport to cover their meetings. Sarah, at 10, simply asked if she could still call Howard Daddy. His heart broke and mended in the same moment. Kelly proved invaluable during this time. The children stayed with her while Howard dealt with the legal aftermath, providing them stability and a safe space to process their emotions. "They're strong kids," Kelly assured him over coffee one morning. "They get that from you, not their biology." The federal trials moved quickly, the evidence too overwhelming for any real defense. Eric's lawyer attempted to paint him as a victim of Stacy's manipulation, while her lawyer tried the opposite approach. Neither strategy worked. Howard attended each day of the trials, sitting silently in the back of the courtroom. He wanted them to see him, to know he was watching their downfall. Both Eric and Stacy attempted to contact him through their lawyers, offering deals and threatening to reveal embarrassing personal details. "Let them," Howard told Franklin. "I have nothing to hide. They're the ones who built their lives on lies." The convictions, when they came, were comprehensive. Eric lost everything: his freedom, his brokerage license, his reputation. The judge was particularly harsh, noting the pattern of destruction across multiple families. Stacy, facing 15 years in federal prison, finally showed emotion during her sentencing. "Please," she begged the judge. "My children need their mother." "You should have thought about that," the judge replied coldly, "before you used them as pawns in your scheme." 5 years passed. Howard rebuilt his life, focusing on his children and his business. The house that Eric and Stacy had tried to steal became a home again, filled with new memories that slowly buried the painful ones. The children, supported by therapy and Howard's unwavering love, began to heal. They chose to keep the Graves surname, a decision that meant more to Howard than any financial victory. "Blood doesn't make a family," James announced one evening over dinner, now 18 and preparing for college. "Actions do." Jason, having found a new passion in photography, nodded in agreement. "Besides, who wants to be associated with those two?" Sarah, now 15 and still playing piano, had perhaps the simplest take: "You're our dad. Period." Both Eric and Stacy attempted to contact the children from prison. Their letters went unopened, their calls unanswered. The children had made their choice, choosing the father who loved them over the parents who had seen them as tools for revenge. Howard's revenge hadn't just been about punishment, it had been about justice, about protecting not only his family but preventing Eric and Stacy from destroying other lives. In the end, blood had proved thinner than water, but integrity had proved stronger than both. The final piece of mail Howard received about the case was a notice that Eric and Stacy had been denied their appeals. He filed it away without comment, then went to watch Sarah's piano recital, where she played Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata flawlessly. Looking at his daughter on stage, Howard knew he'd won more than just a legal victory. He protected the only thing that truly mattered: his family's future. Eric and Stacy had tried to use love as a weapon, but they'd never understood that real love, like real strength, couldn't be faked or manipulated. It was this understanding that made Howard not just a victor, but a father. And in the end, That was the only title that mattered. Epilogue. 10 years after the verdict. The visiting room at the Federal Correctional Institution in Danbury, Connecticut, remained as austere as it had been for the past decade. Stacey Graves, now showing strands of gray in her once perfect blonde hair, sat alone at a metal table. The guard had informed her 30 minutes ago that her children wouldn't be coming again. She'd been sending monthly visitation requests for 10 years, and for 10 years, they'd been declined. Her prison uniform hung loose on her frame, a far cry from the designer clothes she'd worn during the trial. The other inmates called her the schemer not for her crimes, but for her endless plots to regain contact with her children, all of which failed. 3 cells down, a letter lay crumpled in her trash bin. Dear Ms. Graves, we represent James, Jason, and Sarah Graves. This is our final notice requesting that you cease attempting to contact our clients through any means, including but not limited to letters, phone calls, or visitation requests. Any further attempts will result in legal action. Respectfully, Morton and Associate. At the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, Eric Graves faced his own daily humiliations. His prison job in the laundry facility was a far cry from his corner office at the brokerage firm. His cellmate, ironically, was another financial fraudster who'd once sought Eric's investment advice. Eric had tried writing a memoir titled Brother versus Brother. The truth behind the headlines, but every publisher rejected it. The rejection letters all carried the same message. Howard's story was already public record, documented in court transcripts and investigative journalism pieces. Nobody wanted Eric's self-serving version of events. Meanwhile, in Greenwich, Connecticut, Howard Graves' life had taken a markedly different path. The old colonial house, once a battlefield in Eric and Stacey's scheme, had become a true family home. Howard had considered selling it after the trial but decided against it. Instead, he'd renovated it completely, erasing the physical remnants of betrayal while preserving the good memories his children had grown up with. On this particular Sunday evening, the house was alive with celebration. Sarah, now 20, was home from Juilliard for the weekend, preparing for her first major piano recital at Carnegie Hall. The twins, at 23, had both graduated college, James with a degree in biomedical engineering from MIT, and Jason with a degree in investigative journalism from Columbia. Dad, Sarah called from the kitchen, where she was helping prepare dinner. Jason's latest article just went viral. Howard looked up from his tablet, pride evident in his expression. After the scandal, Jason had channeled his anger into investigating financial crimes. His recent Expose series, Patterns of Betrayal, Financial Predators in American Families, had earned him consideration for a Pulitzer. 3 million views and counting, Jason reported, his old baseball trophies long since replaced by journalism awards. The best part? Someone recognized Uncle Eric's methodology in another case. The FBI's reopening investigations from 20 years ago. James, setting the table, shared his own news. The patent for my medical device authentication system just got approved. No one will be able to forge medical records the way Mom did. Not with this in place. Howard watched his children in every way that mattered and marveled at how they transformed their pain into purpose. The DNA results that Eric and Stacey had wielded as a weapon had become meaningless in the face of real family bonds. Kelly arrived for dinner with her husband Tom, carrying her famous apple pie. Her role during the crisis years had earned her a permanent place in their Sunday family dinners. She'd recently retired from her position as a victim advocate, her experience with her own family having led her to help others navigate similar betrayals. Did you see the latest appeal was denied? Kelly asked Howard quietly while the kids were distracted. Howard nodded. Eric had tried claiming ineffective counsel, but the courts had rejected it outright. His former lawyer had provided documentation of Eric rejecting plea deals that would have reduced his sentence. Franklin called, Howard replied. Stacey's trying to get early release again. Medical issues, apparently. Real ones this time? Does it matter? The conversation was interrupted by the doorbell. Alberto Barrera, the private investigator who'd helped expose Eric's previous victims, had arrived with his wife Maria. After the case, he'd become a close family friend, often consulting with Jason on investigative pieces. Marcus sends his regards, Alberto announced, hanging up his coat. He's in Singapore, teaching forensic accounting. Uses your case as a primary example. Renee Foster arrived next, now running her own cybersecurity firm. She'd partnered with James on his medical authentication system, ensuring it was hack-proof. The success of the Graves case had established her reputation in the field. As they gathered around the dining table, Howard looked at the extended family he'd built from the ashes of betrayal. The conversation flowed naturally, touching on everything from Sarah's upcoming recital to Jason's investigations to James's innovations. The topic eventually turned to recent news about Eric and Stacy, as it sometimes did during these gatherings. Mom's latest letter arrived yesterday, Sarah mentioned, her tone matter-of-fact. I returned it unopened, like always. She tried adding me on LinkedIn, James added with a dry laugh. From a prison computer program account. Claimed she wanted to support my career development. Uncle Eric's more creative, Jason contributed. He attempted to contact me through a prison ministry program, claiming he'd found God and wanted to make amends. My editor got a good laugh out of that one. Howard listened to his children discuss their biological parents with a detachment that had taken years of therapy to achieve. The betrayal had left scars, but they'd healed stronger. Later that evening, after the guests had left and the kids had retired to their old rooms, Howard sat in his study. The wall that had once held family photos now displayed his children's achievements, Sarah's concert programs, Jason's published articles, James's patents. Mixed among them were the legal documents that had ended Eric and Stacy's scheme, preserved as reminders of justice served. His phone buzzed with a text from Franklin Novak, who'd recently become a federal judge. Thought you should know. Eric's trying to publish a book again. Publishers still aren't interested. Some stories only work when truth wins. Howard smiled, remembering the day 10 years ago when truth had indeed won. The evidence had been irrefutable, the justice swift. Eric had lost everything: his freedom, his licenses, his reputation. His attempt to paint himself as a victim of Stacy's manipulation had backfired spectacularly when evidence emerged of his previous schemes. Stacy's fall had been equally complete. The woman who had once prided herself on manipulating men now spent her days in prison counseling sessions, mandatory programs designed to address her sociopathic tendencies. Her therapist reports, which Franklin occasionally shared, suggested she still blamed everyone but herself for her situation. The financial penalties had been severe. Every asset Eric and Stacy had accumulated through their schemes had been confiscated. The restitution orders would ensure that even after their release, they would never regain their former lifestyle. Their attempts at early release had been consistently denied, their appeals rejected. The pattern of deception revealed during the trial had convinced every judge that they remained a threat to society. Howard's own life had flourished in ways Eric and Stacy couldn't have predicted. His investment firm had grown stronger, his reputation for integrity attracting clients who valued honest financial management. He'd established a foundation that helped victims of financial fraud, providing resources and legal support to families targeted by schemes similar to Eric's. The children had exceeded everyone's expectations. They'd taken the pain of betrayal and transformed it into driving forces for positive change. Jason's journalism exposed financial predators, James's innovations protected medical records, and Sarah's music touched hearts while helping fund art therapy programs for traumatized children. Their decisions to keep the Graves surname had been made independently, each child choosing Howard's legacy over their biological parents' shame. They'd even legally changed their middle names, removing any connection to Eric and Stacy's families. The extended family that had formed during the crisis remained close. Kelly's role as aunt had expanded to include mentor and confidant. Alberto's investigative skills had guided Jason's career choice. Renee's technical expertise had influenced James's path in medical security. Even Marcus, though often abroad, maintained regular contact through video calls, sharing his expertise with the next generation of forensic accountants. Franklin's rise to the federal bench had been partially influenced by his handling of the case. His thorough prosecution had set new precedents for dealing with long-term financial fraud schemes. The story had become a cautionary tale in legal and financial circles. Harvard Business School had created a case study based on it, examining how trusted insiders could exploit family businesses. Jason had guest lectured there, providing first-hand insight into the human cost of such betrayals. Eric and Stacy's other victims had found closure through the trial. Several had formed a support group, which Howard's foundation now funded. Their stories had helped change laws regarding financial fraud within families, establishing stronger protections for victims. Howard's phone buzzed again, a group text from his children. Sarah, Carnegie Hall rehearsal tomorrow. Dad, front row seat still has your name on it. Jason, breaking news can wait. Wouldn't miss it. James, bringing the prototype for the new security system. Install teams ready for next week. Howard smiled, remembering Eric's words from 10 years ago. Blood is thicker than water. His brother had been wrong about that, just as he'd been wrong about everything else. It wasn't blood that made a family, it was love, trust, and integrity. The moon cast shadows through the study window, reminding Howard of countless nights spent building the case that had brought justice. But justice hadn't just been about punishment. It had been about protection, protecting his children, protecting other potential victims, protecting the very idea of what family should mean. Eric and Stacy had tried to destroy his family with lies, manipulation, and betrayal. Instead, they'd inadvertently strengthened it, forging bonds that no DNA test could ever break. Their scheme had failed not just legally, but fundamentally they'd never understood that real family transcended biology. As Howard prepared for bed, he paused to straighten a family photo on the wall, a recent one, showing him with his children at James's graduation. Their smiles were genuine, their bond unshakable. In the end, that was his true victory. Not the legal triumph, not the financial recovery, but the family that had emerged stronger from the crucible of betrayal. Tomorrow, he would sit in Carnegie Hall, watching his daughter play Beethoven. His sons would be there, their own achievements adding harmony to their sister's music. And somewhere in prison cells in Connecticut and Brooklyn, Eric and Stacy would continue serving their sentences, learning the hardest lesson of all. Betrayal's price is paid not just in years, but in the love and trust forever lost. The house settled into its nighttime quiet, a home where truth had defeated deception, where integrity had overcome betrayal, where love had proven stronger than blood. Howard Graves slept soundly, knowing that his family chosen by love, rather than defined by genetics, was flourishing in ways Eric and Stacy could never comprehend. In the end, they had tried to break him with a DNA test, never understanding that fatherhood was measured not in chromosomes, but in love, protection, and unwavering support. That was a lesson Howard had known all along, one his children had learned through his actions rather than his words, and one that would continue to guide their family long after Eric and Stacy's names had faded from memory.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
Hey, Reddit. I never thought I'd be one of those people airing out their dirty laundry online, but I need to get this out. My story's not some dramatic Hollywood blockbuster or a soap opera. It's my real, fucked up life. If you've ever had your heart ripped out, then you know what I'm talking about. This is about betrayal, revenge, and maybe a little bit of stupidity on my part. But it's all true. Every word. Let me just cut to the chase. My wife cheated on me for money. Not for love, not for passion, just for cold, hard cash. She hooked up with some guy because he could give her the things I couldn't. Expensive things, luxury shit. And looking back, I feel like a complete idiot for not seeing it sooner. I mean, she played me, and I let her. But let me start at the beginning. My name doesn't really matter for now, but let's just say I'm your average guy. I work in IT. Nothing glamorous, but it pays the bills. I've always dreamed of breaking out of the corporate grind, starting my own business. Something in tech, maybe an app, maybe some kind of IT consulting. Just making a name for myself. But dreams take money, and I didn't have a lot of that lying around. I guess that's where some of the problems started. Enter Emma, my wife. Or should I say, my ex-wife now. Emma's the kind of woman who turns heads when she walks into a room. Picture this. Long, dark hair that always seemed to fall perfectly in place. A smile that could melt ice. And a body that'd make most men lose their train of thought. She knew she was beautiful, and she used it. Trust me, she fucking used it. When we met, I thought I was the luckiest guy alive. She seemed perfect, Fun, smart, and yeah, she had expensive taste, but I figured, who doesn't want nice things, right? At first, it was small stuff. A designer handbag here, some overpriced shoes there. I didn't think much of it because, honestly, I thought I was the problem. Like, maybe I just wasn't making enough, and I should work harder. But as time went on, I started to notice more. She wasn't just into fashion, she was obsessed with it. She had this thing for high-end luxury brands. You know, the kind of shit you see in celebrity Instagram feeds. She'd talk about how she deserved to have the best because, well, she looked the best. In her mind, beauty wasn't just a gift, it was a fucking currency. And I didn't realize that until it was too late. Now, don't get me wrong, I wasn't broke. We weren't struggling to put food on the table or anything like that. We had a decent apartment, we went on the occasional vacation, but I wasn't rolling in cash either. My job was steady, and I was doing well for myself, but I wasn't making the kind of money to buy $1,500 smartphones and $600 blouses every other month. And that's where the tension started. We'd argue about money, but not in the let's sit down and figure this out kind of way. It was more like she'd make these passive-aggressive comments like, you know, it'd be nice if we could take a real vacation for once. Like, somewhere exotic. Or, oh, I saw this amazing dress today. It'd look so good on me, but I guess I'll just wait until we can afford it. It drove me insane. I was busting my ass at work, trying to save for our future, and here she was treating life like some luxury shopping spree she was missing out on. I tried to explain to her that we needed to live within our means, but she'd just get quiet. That kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're failing, like you're not good enough. I started picking up extra work where I could. Freelance gigs, side jobs, anything to make more money. I had this idea for a tech startup that I thought could really take off, but we were stuck in this financial loop. Every time I tried to save, something came up. Usually, it was her wanting something new. It was like she had a bottomless appetite for shit we didn't need. The first real red flag? The phone. We were having dinner one night, nothing special, just some pasta and wine at our tiny kitchen table. Her phone was sitting there, right next to her plate, and I reached over for the bread or something, I don't even remember. As I stretched my hand toward the middle of the table, she quickly snatched up her phone like it was a grenade about to go off. I froze. It was such a weird reaction. You got something to hide? I asked, half joking, but I was dead serious. She gave me this look, this cold, hard look that I'd never seen before. No, she said, flat and defensive. Everyone's allowed to have their own space. You don't need to touch my stuff. That didn't sit right with me at all. We'd never had secrets between us before. At least, I didn't think we did. But that night, I realized something had shifted. Something was wrong, and I didn't know what it was. From then on, her phone was like a vault. She started carrying it everywhere, even to the bathroom. And not just carrying it, clutching it. Like she was afraid it'd spill her secrets the second I got near it. I didn't want to be that guy, the paranoid husband who goes through his wife's phone. But something was eating at me. One day, when she was at work, I decided to try my luck. I found her phone on the kitchen counter, and I picked it up, heart pounding in my chest like I was about to defuse a bomb. Locked. Of course, it was locked. And it wasn't just her usual passcode. No, she had changed it. I didn't know what to do with that anger. I put the phone back, trying to act like nothing had changed, but inside, I knew everything had. Then came the handbag. You know how people say the devil's in the details? Well, in this case, the devil was in a fucking handbag. She had this new purse she'd been parading around, telling me it was a really good fake that she'd gotten online. But one day, curiosity got the better of me. I was sitting alone in the apartment, staring at that bag like it was mocking me. I grabbed it and started Googling. Turns out, that really good fake was an original. $3,000 retail. I couldn't believe it. I sat there on the couch, phone in hand, looking up every detail of that brand, checking serial numbers, stitching patterns, the whole deal. There was no doubt. It was real. And that's when everything started to click. The phone, the clothes, the shoes, all of it. She wasn't buying knockoffs. She wasn't getting this stuff with her paycheck either. Someone else was paying for it. I confronted her about it that night. Is this bag real? I asked her, holding it up like Exhibit A in a courtroom. She didn't miss a beat. No, of course not. It's a really good copy. You can't even tell the difference, can you? But this time, I wasn't buying her bullshit. I knew the truth. She was lying to my face, and I felt like a complete idiot for believing her all this time. But I didn't let it turn into a fight. Not yet. I wasn't ready. I needed more than just a hunch. I needed proof. And when I found it, well, things were going to get a lot worse before they got better. This was just the beginning. I didn't know how deep this rabbit hole went, but I was about to find out. So, here's where things start getting real. After that whole handbag incident, I knew I couldn't just let things slide anymore. I couldn't sit there and keep pretending everything was normal while my wife, Emma, the woman I thought I knew, was out there lying to my face. But I didn't want to confront her without knowing all the facts. I needed to catch her in the act, so to speak. One morning I got a day off, but Emma didn't know that. She was up early, dressed in one of her perfectly put-together outfits, makeup on point, ready to head to work, or so she said. That's when the idea hit me. Why not follow her? If she was lying to me, I'd catch her in the act. I figured, worst-case scenario, she'd actually be going to work and I'd be wrong. But something told me she wasn't. She kissed me goodbye like usual, grabbed her bag, and walked out the door. I waited a few minutes, just to make sure she wouldn't suspect anything, and then I followed. I kept my distance as she walked down the street, but my heart was pounding like I was in some kind of spy movie. My hands were sweating, and my mind was racing with a million thoughts. What if she really wasn't going to work? What if she was meeting someone else? What if? Then it happened. She didn't go to her job. In fact, she didn't even head in that direction. I followed her for about 10 minutes, but then I lost her. She got into a taxi, and before I could catch the plate number or follow closely enough, it sped off. I stood there, watching the taillights disappear, feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I wasn't about to give up that easily, though. I decided to head to her workplace and ask around. When I got there, I saw one of the employees I'd seen a few times before. She recognized me too, probably from the occasional office party or when I'd pick Emma up. I tried to play it cool, asking if Emma was around or maybe on break. That's when the bomb dropped. "Oh, she doesn't work here anymore," the woman said casually, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "What do you mean?" I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. "She hasn't worked here for at least 3 months. I thought you knew." My heart nearly stopped. 3 months? Emma had been leaving for work every morning like clockwork. And for 3 months, she hadn't even had a job? I felt like I'd just been sucker punched. I thanked the woman and left the office, my mind spinning in 1,000 different directions. The anger bubbling inside me was white hot. I wanted to go home, wait for her, and tear her a new one. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about trust. She'd been lying to me every single day. On the way home, I couldn't keep it bottled up any longer. I called my best friend, Matt, and told him everything. I was pissed, and I wasn't thinking clearly. "I'm done with this, Matt," I said, gripping the steering wheel. "I'm going to confront her tonight. She has no idea what's coming." But Matt, being the level-headed guy he is, talked me down. "Dude, don't do anything rash," he said. "You realize your marriage is hanging by a thread, right? If you go in guns blazing, you might never find out the whole truth. What if there's more going on than you think?" He had a point, as much as I hated to admit it. If I blew up now, I might never find out who she was really seeing or why she was lying. And honestly, I wasn't ready to throw in the towel without getting the full story. "I need your help," I told him. "I need to figure out what's going on." Matt agreed, and we made a plan. The next day, I'd pretend to go to work like usual, but instead, Matt and I would tail her together. He had a better car for this kind of thing anyway. Tinted windows, smooth ride, no one would suspect a thing. So that's what we did. I got up, dressed for work, kissed Emma goodbye like nothing was wrong, and walked out the door. But instead of heading to my office, I met Matt at the corner, hopped into his car, and we followed her. She took a taxi again, and this time we kept up. She didn't head to some cheap motel or a friend's place. Nope. The taxi took her to one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the city. We're talking gated communities, million-dollar houses, The kind of place where people don't just have a nice car, they have several. Emma got out of the taxi, glanced around like she was making sure no one was watching, and walked up to one of those fancy houses. Here's the kicker. She didn't knock or ring the doorbell. She pulled out a key and unlocked the door like she owned the place. Matt and I stayed parked on the street, watching. The house was huge, and it had the kind of driveway that screamed money. We sat there all day, waiting, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. The sun was setting when the door finally opened again, and Emma stepped out. This time, she wasn't alone. A man followed her. Tall, well-dressed, probably in his mid-40s, and everything about him screamed wealthy. He had his arm around her like they were a couple, like they were used to each other's touch. That's when Matt pulled out his phone and snapped a photo of the guy. "Let's see who this asshole is," Matt muttered as we started Googling the guy's face. It didn't take long. Turns out, the man walking arm in arm with my wife was some big-time businessman. A real estate mogul, if you can believe it. He was all over the internet. Articles, interviews, charity galas, the works. And the icing on the cake? We found his Instagram profile. There were plenty of pictures of him, all right? But none of them were with Emma. Nope. His Instagram was full of photos with a completely different woman. His wife. I felt like I was going to be sick. There it was, right in front of me. The proof I'd been dreading. My wife, the woman I'd been living with, sleeping next to, planning a future with, had been living a double life. And this guy? He wasn't just some random fling. He was married too. Matt and I sat there in silence, the weight of everything sinking in. We knew we couldn't act yet. Not without more. I had to go home, pretend like everything was fine, like I hadn't just watched my wife walk out of another man's house. I couldn't blow up. Not yet. I told Matt we'd deal with it tomorrow. We'd have to. But tonight, I had to keep my cool. I had to go home and play dumb like I was none the wiser. So that's what I did. I went home, walked through the door, and kissed her like nothing had changed. But deep down, I knew everything had. After the shock of what I had seen the previous day, I couldn't let it go. The image of Emma walking out of that house with another man, all smiles, haunted me. My brain was working overtime. I knew I had to do something, but what? Blowing up at Emma didn't seem like the right move. Not yet. I needed more information. That's when I got an idea. The businessman. I couldn't stop thinking about him. His face, his profile, his life on display for the world to see, but with a wife who wasn't Emma. I went back to his Instagram page and started scrolling through his photos again. Pictures of his life of luxury, trips to exotic locations, fine dining, but always with his actual wife by his side. She was beautiful too, not in the flashy, materialistic way Emma was, but in a more understated, elegant way. It didn't take long to find her. She was in several of his photos and her account was tagged. I clicked on her profile. It was private, but that didn't matter. I wasn't interested in snooping through her posts. I had a more direct approach in mind. I sat there for a few minutes, wondering how to phrase the message. I knew this wasn't going to be easy for her, and I didn't want to come off like a complete psycho. So I kept it simple. "Hi, I'm reaching out because I have some important information about your husband. I'd rather not say too much over a message. Can we meet? I think it's something you'd want to know, and we can do it in a public place, whatever makes you feel comfortable." I hit send and waited, unsure if she'd even respond. But she did. It didn't take long. Within an hour, she replied, agreeing to meet the next day at a busy cafe downtown. The next day, I arrived early, nerves buzzing through me. I wasn't sure what to expect from this meeting. Would she be angry? Would she not believe me? But when she walked in, she was calm, composed. She had that same quiet grace about her that I'd seen in her photos. We sat down, exchanged some polite small talk, and then I told her everything. I didn't hold anything back. How I had followed Emma, the house, the photos, the fact that her husband was cheating on her with my wife. She listened, not showing much emotion at first. When I finished, she took a deep breath and said, "I need to check this out for myself. Give me your number, and I'll be in touch." She didn't seem surprised or devastated. It was like she had been expecting this, or at least wasn't shocked that her husband could be capable of it. She stood up, thanked me for telling her, and left, leaving me sitting there wondering if I had done the right thing. A week passed. It was the hardest week of my life. I had to act like nothing was wrong at home, like I was still the clueless husband, while in reality, I knew everything. Emma was still going to work every day, but now I knew exactly where she was going. Each time she kissed me goodbye, it felt like a knife twisting in my gut. Then a week later, I got the call. It was her. "Can you come to my house?" she asked. Her voice was calm, almost too calm, and I knew something was up. I agreed, and later that day, I found myself pulling up to her place. A huge, elegant home, far nicer than the apartment Emma and I shared. She greeted me at the door, and as I stepped inside, she led me to the living room. There was a bottle of wine on the table, 2 glasses, but I could tell this wasn't just a casual conversation. "I hired a detective," she said, getting straight to the point. "He confirmed what you told me. My husband has been renting that house for months, meeting your wife there. And he's been buying her expensive things, jewelry, clothes, phones. The whole lot." She poured herself a glass of wine, took a long sip, and looked me in the eye. "I'm going to ruin him," she said, her voice cold and matter-of-fact. "He thinks he can get away with this, but he has no idea who he's dealing with." I could feel the weight of her words. This wasn't a woman who was going to sit back and let her husband walk all over her. She had a plan, and it wasn't going to end well for him. She finished her wine and refilled the glass. Then she turned to me, sizing me up for a moment. "Do you want some wine?" she asked, and I nodded. I wasn't about to refuse. I needed something to take the edge off, and maybe we both did. We talked for a while after that. She told me about her life, how her father had started the business her husband now ran. Her father was wealthy and powerful, the kind of man whose name opened doors and closed others. She didn't mention his name outright, and I got the feeling it was better that way. This was a woman who had been born into power and privilege, and she knew how to use it. We had a few drinks, and the conversation flowed more easily after that. She was smart, sharp, and honestly a little intimidating. But then, without any pretense or build-up, she asked me something I wasn't expecting. "Do you want to have sex?" It wasn't flirtatious or seductive. It was just a question, plain and simple. I stared at her for a moment, caught off guard, but then I realized I didn't need to think too hard about my answer. "Yes," I said. The next hour or so was a blur of heat and intensity. She was an experienced woman. There was no doubt about that. She knew exactly what she wanted, and she took it. There wasn't any guilt or shame, no hesitation. It felt almost transactional in a way, but I didn't care. I was too caught up in the moment, in the escape from everything that had been crushing me. When it was over, I left her house, feeling strangely satisfied. Not just from the sex, but from the fact that for once I felt like I had control over something in this mess. She wasn't just some scorned wife. She was a woman on a mission, and I was a part of that now, whether I liked it or not. When I got home that night, after everything that had happened with the businessman's wife, I couldn't keep pretending anymore. The moment I stepped through the door, I knew it was time to confront Emma. I didn't care about playing it cool, not after everything I'd seen, not after what she'd done. I slammed the door shut behind me, and the sound must have startled her because she turned to look at me with this wide-eyed expression, like she knew what was coming. "We need to talk," I said, my voice low but shaking with anger. She barely looked up from her phone, still scrolling, still acting like nothing was wrong. But I wasn't having it. I walked straight up to her and threw it all out there. "I know everything," I said, my voice rising. "I know about the businessman, about the house, about the lies. You think I'm that stupid? You're a fucking fool if you think I wouldn't find out." That got her attention. She dropped her phone and stood up, her face twisting into something between anger and disgust. But she didn't even try to deny it. "So what?" she snapped. "I don't need you. I haven't needed you for a long time. You're just some placeholder. He's the one who's providing for me now. He loves me. He's going to leave his wife, and we're going to be together." The audacity of it all hit me like a freight train. She was standing there, telling me, no, proudly telling me, that she had been waiting for him to dump his wife for her. It was pathetic. You really think he's going to leave his wife for you? I asked, laughing bitterly. You're delusional. She glared at me, arms crossed, like she couldn't believe I wasn't bowing down to her fantasy. He will, she insisted. You'll see. I'm filing for divorce, I said, my voice dead serious. You can go live in your little dream world, but I'm done with this. We're done. She scoffed. Good. You should have done that a long time ago. And just like that, she grabbed her bag, threw a few things into it, and walked out the door without another word. No apologies, no remorse, just cold indifference. But she had no idea what was about to hit her in a few days. A few days later, everything fell apart for her and her beloved businessman. His wife, no, that woman, the one with the quiet power, wasn't just sitting around after our conversation. She was planning her revenge. With the help of her father, she dismantled her husband's business, leaving him without a thread to his name. I heard bits and pieces through the grapevine, but I didn't care enough to dig into the details. All I knew was that Emma's little fantasy life crumbled just as quickly as it had started. As for me, I filed for divorce, and the process moved faster than I expected. Emma didn't fight it. Why would she? She had already moved on, or so she thought. Then, out of the blue, I got another call from the businessman's wife. She invited me to visit her again. I didn't know what to expect, but I went. When I arrived, she poured me a glass of wine, and we sat in her living room. So, she said, looking at me with a calm, calculating expression, what do you want in exchange for all this information? At first, I told her I didn't want anything. I was just glad to see the truth come to light. But then I thought about it. I'd been stuck in a dead-end job for so long, and I did have an idea that I'd been sitting on for a while. There is one thing, I said. I have a startup idea. It's still rough, but it has potential. She listened carefully, but when I finished explaining, she shook her head. No, she said flatly. Not like this. Come back tomorrow with a solid plan. I didn't waste any time. I spent the entire night working on my idea, refining it, turning it into something real. The next day, when I went back to her house, she wasn't alone. There was another man with her, a business analyst. He listened to my pitch, asked a few questions, and then he turned to her and whispered something. She nodded slowly, then turned to me. All right, she said, I'll invest, but I want 35% of the business if it becomes profitable. I was stunned. I knew she was powerful, but I didn't think she'd actually take me seriously. This was more than I had ever hoped for. I agreed to her terms without hesitation. And now, here I am, writing this while putting together a team to get my startup off the ground. I can't go into details yet, but I know it's going to be profitable. I can feel it. Funny how things turn out, huh? What started as the worst period of my life is turning into something that could change everything for me. Thank you, Reddit, for letting me get this all out. Sometimes life takes you down a road you never expected, but maybe that's the point. You don't always know what's waiting on the other side. Update, it's been about a year since everything went down, and looking back, it feels like a lifetime ago. I'm sitting here in my office. Yeah, my office, writing this update, and I can't help but feel a mix of pride and disbelief at how much my life has changed. Things are good, really good, and I owe a lot of that to the lessons I learned during the darkest time of my life. Let me start with the business. The startup I mentioned? It took off faster than I ever expected. The woman who invested in me, the businessman's ex-wife, kept her word. She gave me the capital I needed, and I built a team that believed in the vision I had. It wasn't easy. Those first few months were brutal. Late nights, endless meetings, tweaking the product until it was perfect, but it all paid off. The business now is thriving. We've got a steady stream of clients, and we're growing at a rate I didn't think possible when I was just dreaming about this idea. And before you ask, my relationship with her, the investor, it's strictly business. She's a sharp woman, no nonsense, and she keeps everything professional. We meet regularly, but it's always about the company. There are no hidden agendas, no awkward moments, nothing like what happened between us that first time. We both moved on, and it works. Now let's talk about the fun part, my ex-wife Emma. Yeah, she came crawling back. I didn't think she would, not after how things ended between us. But once news started spreading about my business doing well, she suddenly remembered I existed. It started with a message. Simple at first, just a hey, how have you been? Like she hadn't blown up our life and walked out the door for some other guy. I didn't respond. Then the messages started piling up. Longer, more desperate. She started hinting at how much she missed me, how she made a mistake, how she didn't realize what she had until it was gone. Classic, right? The cherry on top was when she called me one evening, trying to sound sweet and remorseful. She said all the things you'd expect. I still care about you. We had something special. Maybe we could start over. But the truth is, she didn't give a damn about me. She just saw the money, the success, and thought she could slither back into my life like nothing had happened. I let her talk for a bit, then I just told her to go to hell. Flat out. I don't know if she expected me to say that, but the silence on the other end of the line told me all I needed to know. I hung up and never looked back. Let her live in the mess she created. But enough about her. There's someone new in my life now. I met this girl a few months ago. Let's call her Sarah. She's different. No drama, no baggage, no hidden motives. We met in the most random way at a friend's party, and we just clicked. She's funny, smart, down-to-earth, and she doesn't give a damn about the material stuff. She doesn't know about my business yet, at least not the details. I've been keeping that part of my life under wraps, not because I don't trust her, but because I want to make sure she's with me for me, not for the money or the success. We've been spending a lot of time together, and yeah, I'm really starting to like her. It's nice, actually, being with someone who doesn't expect anything from me except for honesty and just being myself. It's refreshing after everything I've been through. I'm not in any rush to tell her about the business. Maybe one day, when it feels right. But for now, I'm enjoying just getting to know her without any of the complications. So, that's where I'm at now. A year ago, I was stuck in the middle of the worst period of my life, with everything falling apart around me. And now I'm running a successful business, surrounded by people who believe in what we're building. I've got my life back, and I've got something more, hope for the future. I want to end this by thanking everyone who's been reading this, who's been following my story. Sometimes life throws you into situations that seem impossible to survive, but trust me, if I can get through it, so can you. Believe in yourself, in your ability to come out stronger, and never let anyone take away your worth. Success isn't just about money or power. It's about learning from the pain, moving forward, and becoming the best version of yourself. I learned that the hard way, but I'm grateful for the lessons, as brutal as they were. To anyone reading this, whether you're in the middle of your own mess or just trying to figure things out, keep going. Believe in the best, and don't let anyone tell you that you don't deserve it. Thank you, Reddit, for being there through it all. I've never been the paranoid type. At least I didn't used to be. Felicia and I had been together for 5 years, married for 3, and life was normal. Comfortable, or so I thought. She worked in marketing. I was doing all right as a financial consultant. We weren't rolling in cash, but things were stable. Nice dinners once in a while, vacations every now and then, and binge-watching shows on lazy Sundays. Nothing extraordinary, just life. But then a few months ago, she started changing. At first, it was subtle. The kind of thing you notice but brush off because, let's face it, no one wants to be that guy. She'd stay late at work more often, claiming her team couldn't get things done without her. Fair enough. Work happens, right? But it was the way she acted when she got home that started to set me on edge. The Felicia I knew would usually collapse on the couch, exhausted, venting to me about her day. Now, she barely said anything. Just a quick hey, kissed me like it was an obligation, and went straight to her phone or shower, like she couldn't wait to escape. She also got weird about her phone. I mean, everyone keeps their phone close these days. But Felicia? She started treating hers like it was top secret CIA intel. Before, she'd leave it lying around without a care. Now, it was always face down or tucked away in her bag. If it buzzed when I was nearby, she'd snatch it up before I could glance at it. And don't even get me started on the excuses. Every time I asked what was up, she'd get defensive. Like I was prying. One night, I suggested we go out for dinner, just the two of us. It's been a while since we had some time together, I said, hoping she'd catch on that I missed her. But she shot it down before I could even finish the sentence. I can't, babe. There's an urgent meeting tonight, she said, tying her hair up in that casual way that used to drive me wild. Gregory dragged things out again. You know how he is. She gave a little laugh, but it fell off like she was performing. Then she kissed me on the cheek, grabbed her purse, and was out the door before I could say another word. I stood there, staring after her, wondering who the hell Gregory even was. She mentioned him before. Some guy from her team, supposedly harmless, but something about how she said his name this time made my skin crawl. But I didn't want to be paranoid. It's not like I had any proof, so I let it slide. Then, a few days later, Courtney, the neighbor from across the hall, knocked on my door. She's one of those people who always seems to know what's going on, even when no one asks. Hey, Caleb, you got a second? She said with that nosy grin of hers. Sure, I replied, leaning against the doorframe. Courtney isn't exactly subtle, so I braced myself for whatever gossip she was about to spill. I was out with some friends last night, and, I think I saw Felicia, she said, her voice dropping into that conspiratorial tone she uses when she's about to dish some dirt. She was at that new Italian place downtown. You know, La Sorella? I frowned. Felicia said she was working late. Courtney gave me a look that said she wasn't buying it. Well, she wasn't alone. She was with some guy. Tall, dark hair, kind of good-looking. They seemed close. There was just a little nudge. Nothing concrete, just enough to plant the first seed of doubt. I tried to shrug it off, but it gnawed at me for the rest of the day. That night, I watched her more carefully. I noticed how she avoided eye contact when I asked her about work. It's the same old stuff, she muttered, scrolling through her phone like I wasn't even there. I wanted to confront her, but what could I say? That Courtney thought she saw her with a guy? It wasn't enough. I needed proof. And proof came sooner than I expected. One evening, Felicia left her phone on the kitchen counter while she went upstairs to take a shower. Normally, I wouldn't even think about touching it. But this time, something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the weird tone in her voice when she mentioned Gregory. Maybe it was Courtney's little story. Or maybe I was just done being in the dark. I picked up the phone. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for, just anything that would explain why everything felt so wrong. And then I saw it. A text from Gregory, right at the top of her notifications. You looked amazing. Can't wait for Friday. It hit me like a punch to the gut. My hands started to shake. I stared at the screen, hoping I was reading it wrong, hoping there was some innocent explanation. But deep down, I already knew. I shouldn't have, but I opened her photo gallery. And there they were, pictures of her and Gregory at some work event. They weren't just friendly snapshots. They were close, arms around each other, smiling in a way that made my stomach churn. She was wearing that red dress she knew I loved, the one she hadn't worn for me in months. The worst part? It was an event I wasn't even invited to. She'd told me it was just for the team, not a big deal, nothing I'd enjoy anyway. And yet, there she was clinging to Gregory like he was her whole world. I locked the phone and put it back on the counter just as I heard the water shut off upstairs. My mind was racing, a mix of anger, hurt, and disbelief swirling together in a toxic mess. I wanted to scream, to confront her right then and there, but I didn't. Not yet. I needed time to think. When she came back downstairs, wrapped in a towel, she gave me a quick smile. What do you want to do for dinner? I looked at her, really looked at her, and all I could see was the woman in those photos. The woman who lied to my face, who betrayed me without a second thought. Not hungry, I muttered, walking past her to the living room. She didn't even ask what was wrong. That was the moment I knew. The Felicia I married, the one I built a life with, was gone. And in her place was someone I didn't recognize. Someone who could look me in the eye and lie without flinching. But I wasn't going to confront her just yet. Not until I figured out exactly what I was going to do about it. Because one thing was certain, I wasn't going to let this slide. The moment I saw those pictures, everything inside me caved in. My heart wasn't just broken. It felt obliterated, like someone took a sledgehammer to everything I thought I knew. I stumbled into the bathroom, locked the door behind me, and sat down on the cold tile floor. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't breathe properly. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the fact that she lied so easily. That she came home from him, from Gregory, acting like everything was fine, like she hadn't just trashed our marriage for some fling with a guy she'd sworn was just a friend. I slammed my fist against the floor, the sting of pain grounding me. I stared at the wall, my mind racing. The worst part wasn't even the pictures. It was her. How cold she'd become. How, for months now, every time I'd reached out, hoping to pull her closer, she just drifted further away. I'd felt the distance growing between us, but I kept telling myself it was just a phase, that work was stressing her out, that we'd get through it. But now I knew the truth. She wasn't just slipping away. She was running straight into the arms of Gregory. And I had been too stupid to see it. I could hear her moving around outside the bathroom, probably getting dressed for bed like it was any other night. My blood boiled at the thought. How could she lie to my face, crawl into our bed, and sleep next to me like nothing was wrong? I clenched my jaw, so tight it hurt. She didn't know that I knew. Not yet. And that was the only advantage I had right now. The next day, I hit up my old friend Brian. We've known each other since we were kids. One of the few people I trust completely. I texted him, asking if he was free for drinks, and within an hour, we were sitting in a dimly lit dive bar downtown. Brian gave me a long look as I slammed back my second shot. Alricht, man, spiel. What's going on? I didn't sugarcoat it. I laid it all out, the late nights, the weird phone behavior, the pictures, the message from Gregory. As I talked, I felt the rage simmering under my skin. I hated saying it all out loud. It made it real. When I finished, Brian leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. Shit, Mom, that's brutal. I don't even know what to say. I laughed, but it was bitter. Yeah, join the club. You gotta leave her, Caleb, he said, his voice low. She's not worth it, man. If she's doing this to you now, she'll do it again. Cut your losses, file for divorce, and get the hell out. Brian was right, should have been right, but it wasn't that simple. Leaving her felt like losing. It wasn't enough. Not after what she'd done. I wanted her to hurt, the same way she made me hurt. No, I said, shaking my head slowly. I'm not walking away from this. Not yet. Brian raised an eyebrow. What are you thinking? I'm going to make her feel the same humiliation she put me through. I muttered, more to myself than to him. He gave me a wary look. What does that mean, Caleb? I leaned in, lowering my voice. Amber McLean. Brian's eyes widened, and then he burst out laughing. Amber? You serious? Dude, Felicia hates her. Exactly. Amber had always been a sore spot between me and Felicia. She'd been Felicia's best friend for years, but she and I always had this thing. It was nothing I ever acted on, but Felicia could sense it. Amber had this playful, flirty way about her, and it drove Felicia nuts. We'd fought about Amber more times than I could count, even though nothing had ever happened between us. But now it was going to happen, and it was going to drive Felicia out of her mind. You know, Amber's always had a thing for you, Brian said, shaking his head with a grin. This is going to be messy. That's the point, I said, my voice dark. She deserves messy. Brian gave me a skeptical look, but didn't argue. Just be careful, man. This kind of stuff, it never ends well. That night, after I got home from the bar, I lay in bed next to Felicia, staring at the ceiling while she slept peacefully beside me. I felt like a stranger in my own life. Part of me wanted to wake her up, throw the pictures in her face, and demand answers. But I knew there were no answers that would fix this. Nothing she could say would make it right. So I started planning. I knew exactly how to play this. Amber had always made it obvious that she liked me. It was never anything blatant, just little comments here and there, lingering touches, that playful smirk she always gave me when Felicia wasn't looking. Felicia hated it, and I'd always shut Amber down out of respect for my marriage. But now I was done playing the good guy. I pulled out my phone and opened Amber's contact. For a moment, I hesitated. This wasn't me. I wasn't the kind of person who used people to settle scores. But Felicia had made me this way. She had turned me into someone I didn't recognize. And if that's who I had to be to make her feel the way I did, so be it. I typed out a message. Hey, it's been a while. We should catch up sometime. I stared at the screen for a second, my thumb hovering over the send button. Then, without giving myself time to think, I hit send. The message delivered instantly. I knew Amber would respond. She always did. And when she did, Felicia was going to wish she had never crossed me. Amber replied within an hour. Of course she did. She'd always been quick to respond, especially to me. Hey, stranger. Long time indeed. I'd love to catch up. Coffee sometime. I smirked at the screen. It was too easy. Amber had always been a little too interested, always ready with a sly smile or a lingering look. Felicia had noticed it early on and hated her for it, but I had always brushed it off. Now, I was about to dive headfirst into exactly what Felicia had feared all along. We met at a cozy little coffee shop downtown, the kind of place with exposed brick walls and overpriced lattes. I spotted Amber before she saw me. Long blonde hair, tight jeans, low-cut blouse. She wasn't subtle, not by a long shot. "Caleb," she called out, her face lighting up as I walked over. She gave me a hug that lasted just a second too long, her perfume filling my nose, sweet, with a hint of musk. "Amber," I said, smiling. "You look amazing." She laughed, brushing her hair back behind her ear. "Stop it. You haven't changed a bit." The conversation flowed easily. I kept it light, steering it toward old memories and shared jokes. Amber had a way of leaning in just a little too close, touching my arm at every opportunity. I let her. In fact, I started giving as good as I got, complimenting her laugh, her smile, the way she hadn't lost that spark. She soaked it up, every word. We stayed for over an hour, and by the time we left, the spark I had lit was more like a small fire. Amber gave me one last hug before heading off, her lips brushing my cheek as she whispered, "We should do this again soon." As I walked back to my car, I knew she was hooked. The game was on. A few days later, I texted her, "How about dinner?" "My treat. There's a place I think you'll love." She agreed without hesitation, and that's when I knew I had her exactly where I wanted her. Felicia's best friend was practically begging for my attention, and I was more than happy to give it, at least for now. We met at an upscale restaurant, the kind of place with dim lighting and a wine list longer than the menu. Amber arrived fashionably late, wearing a tight black dress that clung to every curve. "You clean up nice," I said, standing to greet her. She grinned. "You don't look so bad yourself." Dinner was like a slow, seductive dance. Amber's flirtation was less playful this time, more deliberate. She leaned in close when she talked, her hand brushing mine as she reached for her wine glass. I didn't pull away. Instead, I mirrored her every move, locking eyes and smiling at just the right moments. It was all about building tension, letting the anticipation grow. Halfway through the meal, Amber leaned across the table, her voice dropping to a low, intimate whisper. "You know, Caleb, I've always had a thing for you." I pretended to be surprised. "Really? I had no idea." "Oh, come on," she teased, her eyes sparkling. "You must have known. I mean, Felicia never appreciated you the way she should have. I always thought she took you for granted." I took a slow sip of my wine, letting her words hang in the air. "You might be right about that." Amber smiled, her hand slipping over mine. "I mean it, Caleb. You're amazing. Any woman would be lucky to have you." I let out a soft chuckle, shaking my head. "If only you'd told me that sooner." Amber's eyes widened slightly, and I could see the flicker of hope in them, the kind of hope that makes people do reckless things. Meanwhile, back at home, Felicia was beginning to notice the shift. I could tell by the way she started watching me, asking more questions, trying to pry into my day. "You seem different lately," she said one night, her voice cautious. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah, everything's fine," I replied, keeping my tone casual. "Why wouldn't it be?" She frowned, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I don't know. You just seem distant." I shrugged. Maybe I've just been tired. It was a weak excuse, but it was enough to throw her off for now. I wasn't ready for a confrontation. Not yet. I needed to keep things quiet until my plan was fully in motion. The more I pulled away, the more suspicious Felicia became. I could see it in the way she watched me, the way her questions got more pointed. "Where were you tonight?" she asked one evening as I came in later than usual. "Out with Brian," I said smoothly. "You know how he gets? One beer turns into 5. She didn't seem convinced, but there wasn't much she could say. After all, she was the one sneaking around with Gregory. If she wanted to accuse me of anything, she'd have to admit her own guilt first. I made sure to keep things just ambiguous enough to drive her crazy. I didn't give her anything solid to latch onto, just enough to make her wonder. It was a delicate balance, but I was getting good at it. The key was to make her feel exactly what I had felt: confused, paranoid, and constantly questioning everything. Every time I saw her glance at her phone or furrow her brow when I gave her a vague answer, I felt a dark sense of satisfaction. It wasn't enough to even the score. Not yet, but it was a start. And Amber? She was all in. The dinner had gone perfectly, and by the end of the night, she made it clear that she was ready for more. She kissed me on the cheek as we said goodnight, her lips lingering just a second too long. "Call me," she whispered, her breath warm against my skin. I smiled. Count on it. As I drove home that night, I couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of triumph. Felicia had no idea what was coming, and Amber was falling deeper into the trap with every passing day. The stage was set. All I had to do was play my part and wait for the right moment to watch it all fall apart. Our wedding anniversary arrived faster than I expected. It was supposed to be a celebration of love, right? 5 years together, 3 of them married, and instead, I was planning a grand spectacle of betrayal and humiliation. The irony didn't escape me. Felicia had no idea what was coming. She'd chosen her path with Gregory, and tonight, she was going to see just how far off course she'd veered. I went all out. I booked a countryside villa, a gorgeous, sprawling estate with ivy-covered walls, chandeliers, and a garden that looked like it belonged in some fairy tale. We invited everyone: friends, colleagues, neighbors. And of course, Gregory. I made sure he got an invite. The point wasn't just to hurt Felicia, it was to make sure she had an audience. That morning, Felicia seemed genuinely excited. It was the most animated I'd seen her in months, which only pissed me off more. Her excitement wasn't for me. It was for the show we'd put on for everyone. She floated around the house, humming to herself as she got ready, completely unaware that I was just as excited, for very different reasons. By the time the evening rolled around, the villa was packed with guests. I greeted everyone with a smile, playing the role of the perfect husband. Felicia looked radiant in her dress, that same damn red one she'd worn with Gregory. I couldn't decide if she wore it out of guilt or arrogance, but either way, it only fueled my resolve. Throughout the night, I stayed close to Felicia, my hand on the small of her back, whispering sweet nothings in her ear. She beamed at our friends, soaking up every compliment about how lucky we were, how strong our relationship seemed. I nodded along, biting down on every word I wanted to say out loud. If only they knew. Amber was there too, looking stunning and dangerous in a sleek black dress. I caught her smirking at me from across the room, and I gave her a subtle nod. She knew her role. She knew exactly when and how to move. Gregory, on the other hand, showed up late, exactly as I had hoped. I was mid-conversation with some of Felicia's co-workers when I noticed her freeze for just a second, her eyes flickering toward the door. There he was, walking in like he owned the place, wearing that smug smile I knew so well from the pictures. The change in Felicia was instant. Her entire body seemed to come alive. She smiled, really smiled, in a way I hadn't seen in months. It was like watching someone wake from a long sleep. That was all the confirmation I needed. I'd wondered if I'd imagined their connection, if I'd overreacted. But seeing the way she looked at him, there was no mistaking it. I clenched my jaw, but forced myself to stay composed. No explosions, no fights, not yet. There was a script to follow, and I was going to stick to it. I made sure to give Gregory a warm welcome, clapping him on the shoulder and handing him a drink. Felicia watched us, her smile tight and nervous. She had no idea just how much I knew. As the night wore on and the crowd began to thin, I slipped away from the party. Felicia noticed, of course. I could feel her eyes following me as I excused myself and disappeared up the grand staircase to the second floor. That was her cue. Soon enough, she'd come looking. But by then, it would be too late. Amber was already waiting in the room, leaning casually against the bedpost with that same mischievous grin. "You sure about this?" she asked, though we both knew she wasn't going to stop me. More than sure, I muttered, closing the door behind me. She didn't need any more convincing. Within minutes, we were tangled up in the sheets, her hands everywhere, her breath hot against my neck. It was wild, messy, nothing like I'd ever experienced with Felicia. But it wasn't about the sex. It was about the plan, the moment of reckoning that was about to arrive. And right on cue, the door swung open. Felicia stood there, frozen in the doorway, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to absolute devastation. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Amber, completely unbothered, sat up slowly, pulling the sheet around her like she was wrapping herself in victory. "Well," Amber said with a smirk, "looks like you finally know what it feels like to be betrayed." I watched Felicia, waiting for the explosion, but she didn't yell, didn't cry. She just stood there, her face pale, her knuckles white as she clutched the doorknob. I could see the gears turning in her head, the realization dawning that not only had I caught her cheating, but I'd taken it a step further, humiliating her in front of the person she hated most. "You," she finally whispered, her voice shaky. "You son of a bitch." I sat up, completely calm, and gave her the same smile she'd given me so many times before when she thought I didn't know. "Now we're even, Felicia." She stared at me, her chest heaving with rage and betrayal. And for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment when she'd finally understand what it felt like to have your world ripped out from under you. Downstairs, I could hear the party continuing, oblivious to the chaos unfolding upstairs. But I knew it wouldn't stay quiet for long. Felicia would run back down, and soon enough, everyone would know. Whispers would spread, and the humiliation would set in, just like it had for me when I found those photos. Felicia backed away from the doorway, her eyes never leaving mine. "You're disgusting," she spat, her voice venomous. I shrugged, utterly unfazed. Takes one to know one. And just like that, she was gone, slamming the door behind her. Amber chuckled softly beside me, lighting a cigarette as if this were the most normal thing in the world. "That was fun," she said, blowing a plume of smoke toward the ceiling. I didn't respond. I just lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant sounds of laughter and music from downstairs. The plan had gone perfectly. I got my revenge. But as I lay there, the victory felt hollow. The satisfaction I thought I'd feel didn't come. Instead, there was just this empty space where my anger had been. I'd won the game, sure. But what had I really gained? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Felicia stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes wide, lips parted slightly like she was struggling to draw breath. I could see it in her face. The disbelief, the betrayal, the sick realization that her lies had come crashing down. She wanted to scream, maybe cry, but no sound came out. She looked at me, then at Amber, her mind racing to piece together the nightmare unfolding in front of her. Amber, still perfectly composed, slid off the bed without a care in the world. She moved slowly, savoring every second of Felicia's agony, and draped a silk robe over herself like she'd won some kind of victory. "Well," Amber said, her voice cold and dripping with satisfaction, "now you know how it feels to lose trust." Felicia's face crumpled, and for a second, I thought she might collapse right there in the doorway. But she didn't. Instead, she glared at Amber with a hatred so fierce it was almost palpable. You're disgusting," she whispered, her voice cracking. Amber just laughed, a cruel, sharp sound that echoed through the room. "Don't act so surprised, Felicia. We both know you had this coming." Felicia's knuckles turned white on the doorframe. For a moment, I thought she might lunge at Amber, but instead, she spun on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The sound reverberated through the house, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the whispers started downstairs. Amber sat on the edge of the bed, lighting another cigarette with that same smug grin. Well, that went better than I expected. I stayed silent, lying back on the pillows, my mind oddly blank. The satisfaction I'd anticipated wasn't there. I'd imagined this moment for weeks, the perfect revenge, the sweet taste of payback. But instead, all I felt was empty. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. I heard the murmur of voices rising from downstairs, hushed conversations turning into full-blown whispers. The first ripple had hit the water. Someone must have spotted Felicia fleeing from the room, her face pale, her eyes wild. And in a crowd like this, secrets didn't stay hidden for long. Amber leaned over and smirked. You know, it's only a matter of time before everyone knows the full story, right? I nodded. That was part of the plan. After all, Felicia wasn't just going to lose me. She was going to lose everything. Her friends, her dignity, her carefully curated social image. By the time we made our way downstairs, the whispers had reached full volume. People glanced our way, some with curiosity, others with amusement. It wasn't long before the truth spread like wildfire. Felicia's affair with Gregory, my revenge with Amber, it was all out in the open now, and there was no way to put the pieces back together. Amber, ever the drama queen, wasted no time making her move. As soon as Felicia reappeared, still disheveled and red-eyed, Amber stepped forward, all smiles. "Felicia," she said sweetly, though the venom in her tone was unmistakable. "I think it's time we clear the air, don't you?" Felicia glared at her, jaw clenched tight. "You're not doing this here." "Oh, but I think I am." Amber's smile widened. "You betrayed me. You betrayed Caleb. Hell, you betrayed yourself. And everyone here deserves to know the kind of person you really are." The crowd around us went dead silent. Felicia looked like she wanted to disappear, but Amber was relentless, her words sharp and merciless. "Let's be real, Felicia. You threw away your marriage for some loser who doesn't even have the balls to show up on time." Amber tilted her head mockingly. "What was the plan? Were you going to keep sneaking around with Gregory until Caleb caught on? Or did you think you'd get away with it forever?" Felicia's eyes darted around the room, searching for support, for someone, anyone, to take her side. But the faces staring back at her were cold, judgmental. No one was on her side now. She was utterly alone. Amber turned to the crowd, addressing them like she was delivering the final blow. "I've had enough of being friends with a backstabbing bitch. So, Felicia, consider our friendship over." Felicia's expression crumbled. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Amber didn't wait for a reply. She gave a final smirk and sauntered away, leaving Felicia standing in the middle of the room, exposed and humiliated. And just like that, the social circle Felicia had spent years building began to unravel. It was like watching a tower of cards collapse, one piece at a time. People whispered behind her back, their smiles tight and insincere. Friends she thought she could count on distanced themselves, not wanting to get caught in the crossfire. As for Gregory, he vanished the moment things got messy. I knew he'd bail, and he didn't disappoint. By the time Felicia's world started to crumble, he was already pulling away, trying to salvage his own reputation. Rumors spread at her workplace, too. Felicia had always been the rising star, the one everyone admired. But now she was just the woman who'd ruined her marriage for a fling with a coworker. The whispers followed her into meetings, into every conversation she had at the office. Her professional reputation, once spotless, was now tarnished beyond repair. Felicia tried to fight back at first, tried to explain, tried to justify, but no one wanted to hear it. Gregory kept his distance, refusing to get involved, and without his support, Felicia had nothing to stand on. She was left to face the consequences alone. I watched it all unfold with a strange sense of detachment. I thought it would feel good, seeing her world fall apart. And for a while, it did. There was something satisfying about watching her lose everything, knowing that she was getting exactly what she deserved. But as the days went by, the satisfaction began to fade. The anger that had driven me, the rage that had fueled my every move, it started to dissipate, leaving behind nothing but a hollow ache. I'd won the game, sure, but at what cost? Felicia was a mess, isolated, disgraced, abandoned by the very people she thought would always have her back. And I wasn't any better. I had destroyed her, yes, but in doing so, I'd lost myself along the way. In the immediate aftermath, Watching Felicia's world crumble gave me a strange, grim satisfaction. It felt like justice, the kind of justice I'd imagined 1,000 times over. I watched her stumble through the wreckage of her life like a ghost. No more late-night meetings. No more sneaky texts. Our friends avoided her like a disease. At work, the respect she once commanded evaporated, replaced by whispers and side eyes. And Gregory? He'd ghosted her entirely, leaving her to deal with the fallout on her own. I'd won. I'd burned everything to the ground just like I wanted. For the first few days, I felt triumphant. Every time I saw her walking around the house, empty-eyed, defeated, I told myself she deserved it. When I heard her sobbing quietly in the bathroom at night, I reminded myself of those photos, of the texts from Gregory, of every lie she fed me with a smile on her face. I didn't comfort her. I didn't feel sorry for her. I felt justified. But as the days passed, that sense of victory began to fade, replaced by something else. At first, I couldn't place it, but it gnawed at me like a dull ache. I found myself sitting in the quiet of the house, thinking about what we used to have back when things were good, or at least when I thought they were. It was like a movie reel playing in my head. Lazy mornings in bed, her laughter filling the room. Those early dates where everything felt exciting and new. The memory of the way she used to look at me like I was the only person in the world kept resurfacing, and no matter how hard I tried to push those memories down, they bubbled back up, uninvited and unwelcome. One night, Brian called. He was my biggest cheerleader throughout the whole mess, always reminding me that Felicia got what she deserved. "Let's hit the bar," he said. "One more night to celebrate. You earned it, man." I went, hoping the noise and the drinks would drown out the emptiness creeping in. The bar was loud, packed with people laughing and shouting over the music. Brian slapped me on the back, ordering shots like we were celebrating a promotion, not the end of my marriage. "To freedom," he shouted, raising his glass. "To being done with that cheating bitch." I forced a smile and clinked glasses with him, throwing back the shot. The alcohol burned, but it didn't bring the relief I'd hoped for. The victory felt hollow, the celebration meaningless. Brian kept talking, but his words blurred together in the background. I just sat there, nursing my drink, feeling more disconnected than ever. At some point, Brian leaned in, grinning. "What's wrong, man? You should be on top of the world right now." I shrugged, swirling the whiskey in my glass. "I don't know, Brian. It doesn't feel the way I thought it would." Brian gave me a puzzled look. "You won, Caleb. You got your revenge. You're free now." Free. The word felt foreign in my mind. Sure, Felicia was out of my life, her betrayal exposed, her reputation in ruins. But instead of feeling free, I felt lost. Somewhere along the way, in all the anger and scheming, I'd lost more than just her. I'd lost myself. After another drink, I excused myself and headed home, leaving Brian at the bar. I drove through the dark streets in silence, feeling like a stranger in my own life. The house felt eerily quiet when I walked in, too quiet. I kicked off my shoes, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and sat down in the living room, surrounded by the ghosts of our past. I found myself scrolling through old photos, vacations, birthdays, random candid shots from nights in. There was one of us from our first anniversary, sitting on a beach, smiling like idiots. I remembered how happy I felt that day, convinced that she was the person I'd spend the rest of my life with. I'd believed in us, in love, in the future we were supposed to build together. Now I wasn't sure I believed in any of it. I stared at the photos, feeling the weight of everything I'd lost. Not just Felicia, but the version of myself that existed before all of this. The man who believed in love, who thought trust was unbreakable, who wanted nothing more than to make his wife happy. That man was gone, and in his place was someone I didn't recognize. Someone bitter, hollow, and tired. The silence of the house wrapped around me, heavy and suffocating. I took a long sip of my beer and leaned back on the couch, letting the memories wash over me. Revenge was supposed to bring peace. That was the lie I'd told myself. If I could make her feel the way I'd felt, betrayed, humiliated, then everything would be okay. But the truth was, revenge hadn't healed anything. It had just replaced one kind of pain with another, deeper kind. Felicia was gone, her life in ruins. But instead of feeling victorious, I felt empty. I sat there for what felt like hours, lost in the flickering glow of the TV I'd left on mute. The beer grew warm in my hand, and the photos on my phone blurred as I scrolled aimlessly through them. I knew then that there would be no closure, no neat ending to this story. Just a broken marriage, shattered trust, and the bitter realization that some wounds don't heal. They just linger like scars. I had won, but the victory was meaningless. Peace remained out of reach, and the man I used to be, the man who believed in love, was gone for good. All that was left was the empty house, the quiet hum of old memories, and me, sitting alone in the ruins of a life I thought I understood. And for the first time since this whole mess began, I understood the real cost of revenge. I hadn't just lost Felicia. I'd lost myself.